Is that right? Looks like we're ready to get going at 11:31. Welcome everyone to our Standards and Assessment meeting. This is our committee meeting, new version with new members for 2021. Appreciate all of you being here. I understand also that we have some public comment, and what I'm going to do is ask all of our committee members to introduce themselves, and then we'll go straight to that public comment. And I'll ask Nora Lee to help with that. Each of our visitors who are here to make public comment will be given 3 minutes to address us, and then we'll move on into the agenda. But just by way of introductions, I'm Scott Hansen. I represent District 2, which is Ogden and parts of Weber County. Been on the board for a couple of years now, and a brand new chairperson for the Standards and Assessment Committee. So I'll ask in advance for your forgiveness for any faux pas with rules of order or anything like that, but I'm sure that we can work through this together. But maybe we can just go down the line. I see Jenny's clock on the top of my computer at least. Could you introduce yourself, Jenny, and then we'll ask Janet after that, and Brent?
Yeah, thank you. Jenny Earl, I am District 1 is what I represent. I'm all around Scott's district from the top of the state. And is that all you wanted to know? Anyways, good morning.
Whatever you'd like to tell us.
Almost afternoon. No, I'm good with that. So thank you.
Okay. And Janet?
Good morning, Janet Cannon. I represent District 8, which encompasses part of Granite District and Olive Murray District. And I'm looking forward to serving this year on Standards and Assessment. I hail to our new chief. Wondering if he's going to give us poetry like Jenny Gravitt did. I'll be interested in that. But anyway, I'm glad to be here. Thank you all for joining us.
I'll respond to that one in a minute, Janet. Next, we'll ask our vice chair, our new vice chair, Brent Strait, to introduce himself.
Thank you, Brent Strait, District 4. That includes basically the Bonneville cone of Weber County, the Bonneville High School cone, and about 2/3 of Davis County, or whichever way that goes. And man, looking forward to being a part of this committee. Scott should feel very comfortable because I have no expectations of what the chair does since I am brand new. So looking forward to serving. Thank you.
Thanks. And Laura, you're our new member to the committee with Brent.
Thank you, Scott. I have actually been the chair of Standards and Assessment before, and so I've been here, and kind of a little bit like Janet, maybe we've been around too long. But first and foremost, I'm a wife and a mother and a grandmother. Those would be what I would put on my crown on my head. But I also am really happy to serve and be elected by the people in Davis County, the other half that Brent has, and also part of Salt Lake. But I feel like all of us, that we serve all the students of the state, though we're elected in a certain area. So thank you, Scott. I'm happy to serve under you and with you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Janet did mention the poetry angle. I have to tell you, I don't have the passion for poetry that our previous chair, Jenny Gravitt, had. But I do think it's important for us to start each meeting maybe with something that reminds us that there is some grace and some beauty out there. So look forward, stay tuned for next month, and I'll have something for you at the beginning of the meeting. We have a lot of staff here, and I won't ask all of you to introduce yourselves just in the interest of time. We appreciate your support. I also understand, is Casey here? Casey Duport? Is she on with us? No, maybe not.
Yeah, I'm looking to see if she's on yet, and she is not on yet.
Okay, we'll save that for a minute. And we'll ask Nora Lee if you could help us with the public comment portion of our meeting.
Absolutely. We have 3 public comments today. I believe Tiffany Reese is on right now, so I believe she'll be the first one. Then we have Natalie Klein, and then Rosanna Benali-Sag. Tiffany, are you there?
Yeah, I just didn't know if I was supposed to wait to be called in or something.
You're good to go, Tiffany. You've got 3 minutes to address us on your concerns or your comments.
Okay, so mine is the whole equity, diversity, bias training. I did not write Ms. Belknap is my representative in my district. Anyway, I did not write an email her or any of the group or you guys just because I'm on public comment. I have emailed Ms. Belknap in the past. She did have her representative email me back and say that there was going to be no vote or that they couldn't vote on critical race training and this and that. Okay, anyway, let me get to my comment. The social justice warriors of today and of the past use critical theories to undermine a bunch of things that we in society basically use as our lifeline. They the social justice can use critical theory in anything, even critical theory of Dungeons and Dragons. And in this case, you guys are using the equity, inclusion, and those words. Now, they social justice also has a lot of similarities to communism. They eliminate injustices. They want everyone to be fair and equal. They reject human freedom. They and like to control thought because they want us to follow their rules because they're all correct when they don't think that we know any better. They the critical theory of anything wants to rid oppression in the world, and they limit. There is no limits on what critical theory of anything will do to us. And they will always find injustices and expose them. That's what they want to do because they want power. And this is a virus. It's a cancer, and it's ruining society, and it's silencing so many and making so many people afraid to speak up. And me, I'm a former educator, and I have 6 kids, and I'm just sick at what is going on. And I feel like the narrative that goes around is that you have to pick up on these. Now, any critical theory pits people into groups. And when you pit people into groups, then it makes it so you are essentially doing what it makes it essentially doing exactly opposite of what you really want. And so when you have this equity, diversity thing like that's really not right. Now, social justice warriors use critical theory, and they are ruining us in the form of name calling, and they claim that speech is violent. They ruin us in inclusion. They ruin us in bias. And all of this is unsafe, and it is a cancer that is ruining us through a power and all of that, and it's silencing opinions. And I personally feel like the school board has no right and should have no real power to take away my right of freedoms to think and to teach my kids. I don't feel like you guys should have to.
That's time.
Okay, so you guys shouldn't vote. And so I'm asking you to vote no on that equity, diversity, bias training. Thank you.
Okay. Next person up, do we have Natalie Klein?
Okay, can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks for having me. My name is Natalie Klein. I'm a new member of the state school board, but I am speaking for myself today and for many, many of the parents and families of Utah that elected me in an effort to uphold the oath I took just yesterday to protect our constitutional freedoms. A large majority of Utah children from all racial and ethnic backgrounds have been raised in homes where they are regularly taught that we are all children of a loving God, which makes us all brothers and sisters. They are taught to love one another and even to love their enemies and to pray for those that would mistreat them or disagree with them. A large percentage of these children's parents sacrificed 18 to 24 months of their own lives to travel to all parts of the world to love and serve those that are different from themselves. Utahns are by and large good and loving people and teach their children to be so also. We are one of the most inclusive states in the country. When making laws and policies, we must protect essential constitutional rights at all costs. Any teaching or training that attempts to place limits on our thought, speech, and beliefs is not education, but indoctrination. And when only one chosen bias is deemed right to the exclusion of all others, our schools and our communities become hostile places that are anything but diverse, inclusive, safe, or welcoming. Accusing people of having conscious or unconscious biases insinuates that their thoughts are wrong simply because they are different from the accuser's own thoughts or biases. This can be very destructive, causing individuals to not be able to trust others or themselves. They begin to live in fear and to self-censor, afraid that these, quote, wrong thoughts might somehow be detected by others or accidentally slip out, causing them to be unjustly condemned or unfairly labeled or categorized as racist, homophobe, transphobe, etc. When we teach people, especially children, to not trust their own conscience, that inner voice that helps them discern right from wrong and truth from error, that encourages them to do good and avoid unwise decisions or actions, or we attempt to reorient or psychologically manipulate that internal compass in any way, we cause irreparable harm. In an environment where only certain thoughts or biases are deemed acceptable, where whether conscious or unconscious, freedom of speech and cognitive liberty are destroyed, and compelled speech quickly follows and becomes the new norm. We cannot force one particular bias to the exclusion of all others and call ourselves inclusive. Inclusivity means equally allowing and encouraging a diversity of thought and opinion to flourish in the culture, the workplace, and the classroom. The best way to examine ideas, develop critical thinking skills in our children is to welcome all ideas to be shared and freely discussed in an environment of respect and civility, free from coercion and intimidation. If we are sincerely committed to promoting equity, diversity, and inclusion, we must be genuinely inclusive of all who hold and express a diversity of thought, opinion, and belief, and ensure that all individuals feel safe and free to share their differing views without fear of being silenced, condemned, or canceled. To accuse them. Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we have Rosanna. Are you?
I know that okay, Rosanna, you're on. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Standards and Assessments Committee members, and for everyone attending this event or this meeting. So my name is Rosanna Benali Sag, and I'm the chair of the Access Committee, which is an advisory committee to the Utah State Board of Education. So the Utah State Board of Education did create this Access Committee to address equity and inclusion, and also bring awareness to diversity. So I just wanted to make that note as well too. I also want to recognize the tireless efforts of our committee members and the members who are here who represent specific communities that do address a lot of these as it relates to equity. And so we have John Arthur, who represents our Asian American community, our students, Dr. Kalina Potts, who's a member at large, who has much background in school turnaround. And then we have Dr. Clustina Mahan Reynolds, who's our African American and Black representative. And then Dr. Ali Martin, who represents the population of the LGBTQ students. And then unfortunately, he couldn't be here, Brian Yazzie, who is the vice chair, and he represents the Native American community, and then myself as well too. So as we're looking at this work, we want to be intentional in this work, and that we are looking at the safety of our students here in Utah, especially students of color, especially students who are underrepresented and affected with this every day, racism, xenophobia. And so we want to be a state who is inclusive. We want to be a state who addresses these topics, and we aren't being reactive. And so that was one of the reasons why our Access Committee addressed the Utah State Board of Education. And we're very thankful that you all are addressing it, because this is definitely a time where we can start helping our students. So as we're looking at recommendation to looking at professional learning, we want to make sure that we are intentional in how we're helping our educators and our students through this process. And so recommendation to educators and administrators are provided anti-racist, bias / equity literacy professional learning, as well as opportunities to learn about themselves and minoritized groups to raise awareness and promote change within our educational system. So that is recommendation 2. We never identify a specific theory. We never identify curriculum. We are solely bringing this to attention to the Utah State Board of Education to make sure that we are moving in the right direction. And as we had seen in December 2020, Governor Herbert signed the Utah Compact. So obviously this is a very important topic within the state, and as it should be with our Utah State Board of Education. And we also have many members in our community who can speak to this. And if the Utah State Board of Education, as they are moving forward with recommendation 2, we can definitely bring those individuals to the forefront and help guide through this process as well too. So we want to make sure this is not just that we want to make sure that we are here for the safety of our students, especially students who are underrepresented and who are being targeted. And so we also want to thank the Utah State Board of Education for addressing this, because it is very important that we move forward with this topic, because it is part of the systemic issue that we are having to deal with.
Is
that my time, Patty?
It's time.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Norley, is that, do we just have the 3?
That's all I had was 3.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, those who gave public comment. We appreciate you engaging with us on these important topics. We understand current events and many other things have brought these to everyone's attention. And we know they're sensitive topics, and we appreciate all the viewpoints being brought to us so we can consider those as we go forward. We'll move now to the first item. I did see we do need to make one more introduction. I see that Casey is here. I was informed this morning that Casey has just been hired as our new USB Director of Diversity. Is that correct, Casey? Maybe you could take just 1 minute and introduce yourself to us all.
Thank you. I'm Casey Dupart. I am the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and I am by training a school psychologist, board certified behavior analyst, and school leadership. And Utah is move number 6 for me as an Air Force spouse. So I've been able to kind of support the development of this work while moving around, living in Italy, Maryland, North Carolina, Texas, and now here. So thank you.
Welcome. We hope this is a long stop for you, Casey. We'll move on then to agenda item number 1. And let me see. I've got to get my agenda back up. There we go. This is an information item. We're going to go over the administrative rules process, and I believe that Angie's here to help us with that. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. Thank you, Chair Hansen.
Deputy Superintendent Stallings.
Thank you. Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy with the State Board. Happy to be with the Standards and Assessment Committee today, so thanks for having me. I'm just going to go over an introduction of the Administrative Rules webpage on our website, as well as cover some resources for board members. As you're starting the new year, many of you may not be aware that we recently updated the administrative rules page on our website to hopefully make it more user-friendly for you as you are working with rules and researching rules. And so that's why we're here today, and we'll be doing the same presentation at the beginning of all 3 committees today. So first, just as a reminder, the administrative rules, I think you all have become aware of them recently as you approved a number of them yesterday, and I believe there's 2 or 3 on today's agenda, but the rules are your way as a board to establish standards, legal standards, for the public education system. And in order to find this webpage, first, I'll take you to our landing page. This is the State Board of Education's landing page. Once you get to the landing page, if you scroll down, you'll see this tile here that says Administrative Rules. You click on there and it'll take you to the landing page. The landing page was recently reformatted, and I just want to give a quick shout out to Sybil Child, Michelle Miller, and Leonard Brooks from USBE staff who took about a year reworking our webpage and adding a lot of the resources that I'll be showcasing today. But you can see that as you get to the landing page, you'll see all of our board rules numbered in order. The last one being R277 929. We don't have 929 rules. We have a little over 180, but they are kind of grouped into different sections. For example, the rules in starting at 550, our charter school rules, our educator licensing rules are mostly in the 300s or all in the 300s, the UPAC rules in the 200s. So there is some method to the numbering madness. And for any of you who would like to know a little bit more about that, you can let me know, although it's probably just a little bit more in detail than most board members want to know. The one rule I will bring to your attention is this R277-100. It includes definitions that apply to all of the rules, 100 through 929. So for example, today in law and licensing, we discussed the definition of parent, which actually includes parent, our legal guardian. And so if you ever see the word parent, for example, in any of the other rules, we rely on the definition in 100. So now you've seen these rules are updated fairly quickly after we file an effective date for a rule. So for example, you'll remember in yesterday's board meeting, the board made a motion to make R277-726 effective, directed staff to file a notice of effective date. That we will do that today, which makes that rule effective, all the changes effective as of today. And then our web and IT staff will update this website usually within a week. They often do it the day of or a couple of days after, but try to get that done within the first week. Let me show you some of the features that I particularly love about this new website change. If you go to board rule status, and hopefully you saw I clicked right here on this right-hand side, board rule status, you can see the status of recent rules that were considered or approved by the committee and board. So R277-100 is an example where the Law and Licensing Committee reviewed that in October, and then the full board approved it in November. It was published with the Office of Administrative Rules on December 1st, and now will be made effective today. If you're ever wondering when a rule is set to take effect, and this is assuming that no public hearing is requested or other board members request for there to be a pause on the effective date, you can see at the top that it gives kind of that short history of when the board approved it, filed with the administrative rule or open for public comment with the Office of Administrative Rules, and then its proposed effective date. So that's helpful information for board members, members of the public, staff, etc. I'll show you down here just an example of what the status looks like in a couple of just unique instances. The board rule for the school turnaround program is a good example to look at, where you can see that that rule was actually reviewed by the committee, the Standards and Assessment Committee, 3 times in September, October, and then during meeting October 30th. And then it went to the board in November and then published. This rule is also ready to be made effective today. And then you can see another example where the residential treatment center rule that you all approved yesterday, it will be published, will be filed with the Office of Administrative Rules this month, and then will be open for public comment in February and be ready to be made effective in March. Something that you may see, it's not often, but it is something that can appear, is kind of this notice of a rule that will likely be scheduled by board leadership to be heard next month, the school meals program. So you can see that staff is anticipating recommending that it be assigned to the Standards and Assessment Committee for February. Of course, that could change if board leadership wants to change it, but that's also a great resource if you or members of the public are wondering what rules might be coming. And here's, of course, the statewide online education program rule. You can see that that rule that you made a motion on yesterday had a review in June, July, October, and then was finally approved by the board in November and yesterday, you made a motion to make it effective after the public hearing. So that's the board rule status page, which I think is really a great resource. The other resource I wanted to bring to your attention is here on the resources tab. You'll see that on the right hand side. If you click that, the documents that are uploaded to Civic Clerk, the general rulemaking requirements that are established in our board policy 1002, as well as a process overview and frequently asked questions, are all on that page. And they're great resources for members of the public who might reach out to you with a general description of our process. This, if you click on the searchable PDF of board rules, this is a great way for you to search all of the board's rules, only the State Board of Education's rules, not administrative rules from other agencies. But it has all of our rules in one PDF. So you can do a Control F and, for example, look at the word online education. And then you can see everywhere throughout all of our rules where online education is mentioned, or teacher license. These are just examples of words you might choose. But this is a great resource if you aren't sure what rule number to look for. You're sure that there's something about, say, school breakfast, and maybe we don't even have that in, but school meals. Maybe I thought that would be. I should have practiced the word that I was going to search for. But whatever word you want to put in there, it helps you identify where in our rules that's mentioned. So again, that is the board rules PDF searchable tool under our resources right here. And then the last couple things I will mention is you can find out information on previous public hearings. You can see we've got information from back to 2016 on the web page under public hearings. And then we also have on our main web page a place where you can see all rule records for the last, I believe it's since 2018. So if you go here, you can see in 2018 what amendments were made to different rules. Same with 2019. This is a great way to see prior versions of the rules. You can see 100, this R277-100 is a rule that is commonly updated because it does include all of our rules for all the other rules. I apologize. I just noticed my daughter walking in. I'll try to not be flustered by that. So if you need to look at former versions from 2018, 19, or 20, that is a great place to look. If you're interested in versions of rules from prior to 2018, we invite you to reach out to Sybil Child. She's on today as well. She is the board's policy legal assistant. She works on the policy team. She acts as our paralegal of sorts, or legal assistant. She files all of our rules with the Office of Administrative Rules. She also formats all of our rules and makes amendments. So if you have questions about rules prior to 2018, you can reach out to Sybil Child. And Sybil, could you just, hopefully your video is on, just wave so that board members can see her and know that she's a resource if you're unable to reach me, Ben Rasmussen, or Jeff Van Holten, who generally, Jeff, Ben, and I are the three drafters of your rules. Then the last thing I will bring to your attention, we do have and I'll just go straight to the Office of Administrative Rules website. There is a link on our resources page, but it's taking a minute to load, to the Office of Administrative Rules website. That is a place you can also access rules, although I would recommend that you access the rules from our website, because there are times that the Office of Administrative Rules website is delayed. So all of the agencies in the state that have rulemaking authority and make rules, they file those with the Office of Administrative Rules, and the Office of Administrative Rules maintains a code, that code online. So you can go here to education and you'll see the State Board of Education's rules listed there. I personally, and you can see theirs are also in order, 100, 101, etc. And it is another resource. There are times when their website has delayed in the past by 3, 4, even 5 months behind. They did just this week announce that with their new revisions to their website, and I believe they have a different software or some sort of provider that's helping them, that they anticipate being able to have their website updated within 10 days of when agencies make their rules effective. So that is a great news, but they are very new at doing this. And so I still would recommend you go to our website to find the most recent version or most up-to-date version of our board rules. But that is also an option for you at the Office of Administrative Rules. And that is all that I planned on covering today. I'm happy to answer any board member questions. And other than that, that's your introduction to the Administrative Rules webpage. And hopefully that will help you as you move forward to do your own research. And you can always reach out to me, Ben, Jeff, or Sybil with any questions you have about rules, the rulemaking process, etc. We're here to help you.
Thank you, Deputy Superintendent Stallings. I sure appreciate that. Do we have any questions from committee members or Angie? I would just like to reiterate what she just said about how, the board's website on rules is awesome compared to the Administrative Rules website. Much more accessible, and I early on made the mistake of going to the Administrative Rules website and using an outdated version of a rule, or one that was a rule that was going to be updated in the near future. But I used the old version and it led me down the wrong path many times. So I would just say go straight to the board's website and you won't go wrong there. We will go ahead then to number 2 on our action item list, which is school threat assessment model. And I think we wanted to get just a quick intro from Rhett, if he's here. Is Rhett Larson here? Is he going to lead us into this one?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. So Rhett Larson, School and Student Safety Specialist. Also presenting with me today is David Christensen, the School Safety Data Analyst. So to give you some context for threat assessment, with the tragic events like the school shootings in Florida and Texas, the U.S. Department of Education, Secret Service, and the Federal Commission on School Safety recommends that schools establish a multidisciplinary team and threat assessment procedures. So in 2019, HB 120, which is the Student and School Safety Assessment Bill, created the Utah State Board of Education School Safety Center. And the School Safety Center consists of specialists from the Utah State Board of Education, the Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, and the Department of Public Safety, as well as the University of Utah Safe UT. This same bill also directed us as a School Safety Center to work together to create what's called the School Safety Program. That includes protocols for conducting threat assessment. The board approved the evidence-based threat assessment called the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines, or we refer to it as CSTAG. And again, that's called the Comprehensive School Threat Assessment Guidelines. As a team, we created the Student Threat Assessment Model Policies to help support our LEAs and schools with the implementation of threat assessment and multidisciplinary teams who oversee threat assessment in schools. So there's 2 policies, one for the LEA, and then there's one for the school to help implement them, to help implement these policies and these procedures. And so we come to this committee seeking your approval of the school threat assessment model policy for LEA and the model policy for schools.
Thank you, Rhett. Committee members, I think first, just kind of as protocol as we go forward in this committee, I'd like to see if anyone has any comments or any questions for staff, and we'll go around and let everyone have a chance to do that, and then be happy to entertain a motion after we've gone through at least one round of questions or comments. Laura.
Thank you. Chair, the question I have, Rhett, is when you were talking about this group that helped to put this together, did I hear that correctly? What about our law enforcement officers? How much were they involved in this? And what's their take on this? And once a threat has been determined, so second question, once a threat has been determined, then when and how often are the police officers, not the SROs, but the county police officers or the city police officers involved?
Chair, are you okay if I answer that question?
Yes, please. Let's just
Wonderful.
dialogue here when the question's asked. Go ahead.
Wonderful. So, Board Member Belknap, yes, as a school safety center, we created that, and our specialist from the Department of Public Safety on the school safety center, he is law enforcement. He is a police officer, and we work closely with both our law enforcement partners and our mental health partners. So we want to make sure we're very cautious and aware of when we are looking at policies or when we're looking at practice, we want to make sure we're involving all of our partners so that everybody can be at the table and looking at how do we help support students and how do we help keep schools safe and students safe. And so they're an integral part on both the USBE School Safety Center as well as these multidisciplinary teams that we're talking about. So we don't want to have where we have law enforcement here and we have mental health here and we have school administrators here. We want there to be a multidisciplinary team that comes together when threats are made to look at the situation and to determine whether or not the student actually poses a threat. So there's a difference between just making a threat and someone who poses a threat. So this team will work together to determine, is the threat serious, which we refer to that as substantive, or are they not serious, which we refer to those as transient threats. And the CSTAG model that was approved by the board that was developed by Dr. Dewey Cornell and widely used across the United States and federally recognized, there's actually a nice decision tree process for the school safety center to follow, or the multidisciplinary team to follow, to keep things synchronized, to keep things more fair and equitable, and making sure they're looking at the threat that was made, but also what interventions needed to be taken, that needed to take place to help individuals and schools and all students to keep them safe and making sure we're giving individual support where needed. Law enforcement would be involved in very serious threats outside of the SRO, but we're, as we continue to work and train, we've been very impressed in seeing how schools are looking forward to having this process in place where these partners can come together, collaborate, and come up with next steps. Sorry, that was a really long answer. I'm sorry, Board Member Belknap.
And if I can just piggyback on that a little bit, I noticed on the school model policy, if we look at number 7B, that's where we get down to law enforcement reporting, it looks like. So there's, I think, that whole decision tree model where it says if this really is a criminal offense, then we need to go to law enforcement. That's the way I understood it. Is that right, Rhett?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Any other questions?
I still have some, Chair, if you're okay.
No one else wants to speak. We'll let everybody go. But does anyone else have questions? Jenny does. Okay, Laura, ask yours and then we'll go to Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so I have two more. One about the training. It talks about that there will be training. Who is the expert to continue this training? And then the other one is probably another easy answer with this, what the LEA requirements are. Are we adding to their requirements? We're asking them to post this. We're asking them to keep it up. And who's going to check to make sure they're doing that?
Hey, Rhett, you're on.
Okay, thank you. So great questions, Board Member Belknap. So,
but isn't it like shrimp?
Sorry, was there some further questions? I heard some background. I'll just jump into the questions that were presented. So Board Member Belknap, as far as the requirements or responsibilities, House Bill 120 in 2019, that same House bill, did, as well as some other important bills. So, for example, the law enforcement R277736, which is the dissemination of information of schools, they talk about the use and requirement of needing to use multidisciplinary teams and threat assessment. We've been very cautious in these model policies in making sure we're still providing some leeway for local control, because they might not want to go with the comprehensive school threat assessment guidelines. Perhaps there's another threat assessment they want to go with. We did have the CSTAG approved by the board because it's actually an evidence-based threat assessment procedure, but it's up to LEAs to determine what threat assessment they actually want to use. Now, for CSTAG, we do have trainers at the state level, and so every member on the School Safety Center is trained in CSTAG. We also have TOTs, which is training of trainers throughout the state, and we'll continue to build and create those opportunities for trainings for LEAs if they choose to implement CSTAG. And so we do have the ongoing training support, but we definitely want to leave it up to them to determine if they do want to use CSTAG or not. If they do have other threat assessment processes that they want to use, they do have that flexibility. We did put in here, just make sure, that would be a local board decision of what they want to do or what they want to implement. There was another question, and for the life of me, I can't remember what it is. Would you mind asking that board member Belknap? My apologies.
Of course, it's actually kind of two things. Are we asking districts to do more than they were in the past by having this posted to the website, by having these, you've got to banter back and forth on our screens. There was something else that we were requiring the districts to do, if that is different. And who's going to make sure that they're keeping up on these and that they are being revisited? Who checks that?
Sure. So as far as the training piece, schools already, when threats are made in schools, which we know that unfortunately there are threats that are made in school, and administrators and other school personnel, school resource officer, school counselors, school administrators, depending on what stakeholders or what resources that school has, they do come together and they do look at situations. This creates a synchronized evidence-based process. It's just guidelines for them to follow. And so I actually hope it provides a great support to them. It also provides a fair and equitable process to do that as they follow that decision tree. So I wouldn't anticipate it adding additional work. Of course, the being trained in the evidence-based guidelines, CSTAG, or any threat assessment would require some of their time to be trained, but I don't anticipate it adding additional requirements to their plate because it's something they're already having to do. As far as tracking if they're doing that or not, we have added some questions to the assurance document of being mindful of not wanting to add more to LEA's plates of having to fill out items, but a way of us of making sure that we have our T's crossed and our I's dotted for if we're ever asked by the legislature if this is being implemented. We did ask some questions or had questions added to the assurances document.
Thank you, Chair.
There's Board Member Earl and then Cannon.
Okay.
I was just curious. So I did put my hand up, but I guess I'm just wondering, what's your best method? Chair Hansen, is it?
I was just.
Maybe you can't see the
I've got the participants list up now on my screen, and I can see hands raised. So we'll try to use that. If it's not, if I'm not recognizing that, wave your hand at me, and I'll make sure that we recognize you. Patty's going to help me look for raised hands too, but I can't see all of you on the screen all the time at one time. So.
Yeah, that's it. Janet and I, when you said there's no other comments, and we're both like, we got our hands up. So.
Sorry, I see it now.
That's okay. I have a couple of comments or questions. I'm wondering about the time issue. In other words, when there is a threat made and then we've got to put a multidisciplinary team of some kind together, what is the time issue, or what are the barriers to actually getting this group together? Or maybe there's not. Maybe it's a quick phone call. Can you speak to that a little bit, especially if we've got maybe multiple issues in one day? Are they effectively able to get to the people they need to in time to be, to meet the needs? So,
Chair, are you okay if I answer that?
Please go ahead.
You bet. Board Member Earl, great questions. And also thank you for your great support to school safety. We really appreciate it, and appreciate your membership on the collaborative as well. So in looking at this, there's threat assessment, but then there's also crisis response. So if something were to actually happen and be in that crisis response, there's a different protocol and set of responses there. As far as the threats go, if there is those multiple threats, that would be up to that local school to determine when and how that team meets. And so we wanted to make sure, again, to still allow that flexibility for LEAs to still continue to do what they're doing, but provide them these evidence-based guidelines to follow in their decision-making process, while also helping to keep things fair and equitable in identifying threats and whether students pose a threat and what the response is going to be. And so as far as multiple threats and how that works, that would be up to those individual schools to make that determination. Does that help, Board Member Earl?
Yeah, I do have one other question. I should have written it down all the way. I just wrote quick thoughts. Let me see if I can remember. Maybe go to Janet and I'll have to come back. I didn't write a complete sentence. So now I was listening to what you were saying and I can't remember what the other thought was. So.
Okay, should we move to Board Member Cannon then?
Thank you. Red, I would just like to ask you, I guess, the threat that is the biggest concern to me in our schools are young people committing suicide. And I think we have several instances of that, whereas we haven't had instances of shooters or that kind of violence. And so I'm just wondering if you could maybe walk me through how this big multidisciplinary team, everything would address something like a student who is thinking about suicide or who poses a threat with suicide.
Sure. Chair Hansen, are you okay if I answer that question?
Go ahead.
Wonderful. So Board Member Cannon, when we're talking about suicide ideation or threats of suicide, that would be separate than the threats of violence that we're talking about with CSTAG, and using that multidisciplinary team and looking at those threats. For suicide threats and suicide ideation and how that's handled, I think it would probably be best to have Kathy Davis, the suicide prevention specialist, answer those questions, because I do know there's some really great protocol and processes in place for that. And so I'm not sure if she's available, and I'm sorry to pass the buck there. I just want to make sure you're getting the proper response.
Well, that's okay. I have talked to Kathy Davis, but I thought I had read something in here about suicide as well. Maybe let me ask my second question. It talks about how this multidisciplinary team will receive training from qualified professionals, the CSTAG trainers. Can you tell us how that will happen and where these trainers are and who trains them? And is this a function of USBE and your section, or would you just help me with that?
You bet, I'd be happy to. Chair, are you okay if I continue answering these questions?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Wonderful. So with the training piece, every member of the School Safety Center, the USBE School Safety Center, has been trained in CSTAG and are trainers in CSTAG. We have also trained, I believe it's 12 others throughout the state, and we will be offering those additional CSTAG trainings and opportunities for others to become trainers after the pandemic. There is some online training that's going on that's held by CSTAG, but we've kind of found that to be really time consuming. We wanted to be mindful of our educators' time during this year. And so we will provide those trainings in the future. However, it is possible for school administrators to just obtain a copy of the CSTAG manual, and they would actually be able to know how to implement it based on the instructions. There's also free, the decision tree process and some of the documents for CSTAG are available for free on their website. We're in the process of going through the vetting and getting it onto our page as well. But we will provide those trainings in the future. Now, to go back to the suicide question, there are circumstances where students who are posing a threat or wanting to be violent or create a violent act, who are also having thoughts of suicide and having suicide ideation. But we do want to make it clear that all students who have suicide ideation or having those thoughts doesn't mean they're violent or planning, threatening, or threats to others. And so we want to make sure we keep that separate. When I did present CSTAG for the first time, and I'm sorry I don't have updated data for you, I could get that from our Safe UT specialist. But just to kind of give you an example, from July 1 of 2019 through March 31st of 2020, there were 822 threats of violence reported through the Safe UT app in Utah schools. Now, obviously that data is different, and we could give you those updated numbers, but just to kind of give you an example of why we think this work is really important in moving forward to support our LEAs to get this in process.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you. I see that Brett's got his hand raised as well, but Janet, I just wanted to mention that on number 3 on the school threat assessment model policy, 3A, there was a change made recently where it said qualified professional. I think the new version, which is posted on our backup, says that the qualified professional is a comprehensive school threat assessment guidelines trainer or other professionals trained in school threat assessment approved by a local school board. I don't know if you're looking at that version or if you're looking at the previous version.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we'll jump then to Brent for your questions.
Well, actually, my question got answered, and so we can move on. I appreciate that everyone has such great questions, so thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from board members? Janet, you still got your hand up, and I can see Jenny waving, but I can't see her hand anymore. Go ahead, Jenny.
Okay. We'll do the hand. So I kind of have a little bit of a comment. This summer I was able to go with a couple of legislators and do some training down with Sean Reyes. And it was on response, right? In their 3D room. Have you done that before? They've got their 3D room and you have to act. Wow, I'll tell you what, I just have a great deal of respect for our law enforcement, for our principals, and for others that, they have to act immediately on some of these threats. And having an appropriate protocol and things set up, they ran us through 3 different scenarios. And one of those was a school shooting, an active school shooting. And so it was an intense thing. It was interesting to go through that and that they need to know how to respond instantly, not on emotion, but that's also hard to do, right? If you're trying to get someone to, anyways, it was really, really interesting. And I just have a lot of respect. I appreciate all our hardworking individuals across all spectrums that we're addressing here. And I appreciate the thoughtfulness here. I have one last question. Maybe Angie can answer this for me or someone from staff, but what I clicked on, evidence-based, and one of the where's my thing? So there's 3 possibilities for evidence-based, and one of those is that it has been approved by the state board. That was the only requirement for evidence-based on one of the 3 criteria. Is that an accurate statement that if we just give the thumbs up, it could be considered evidence-based? If so, that makes me just a little nervous, but is anyone else there? Look at that.
So anyway, Jen, you're referring to the code 53G 18211? Is that where you are?
Yeah, it's an or, not an and. So there's 3 criteria, and the third one is just our thumbs up. Hopefully, we're not using anything just a thumbs up on this by the state board, but we're using something that's actually got research behind it. But I don't know if anybody has any deeper insights into that. Maybe that's for another day, maybe not today. But
Chair, this is Jeff Van Holt, and I can respond.
Please, Jeff, go ahead.
The response really is yes, you are correct. Because of that or on the list, those are the 3 separate ways you can achieve evidence-based. I believe the idea is that the board would go through a vetting process to make sure that the evidence-based element is there and up to their standard before approving or.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I think when I see that from now on, I think there may be a little bit, maybe make sure we've got a very thorough analysis of it if that's the case. So thank you.
Yeah, we'll have to be careful if we're the ones who can make something evidence-based. I agree. Janet, I see your hand up, please.
I just had one other question that I wanted to ask. Does this multidisciplinary team or does this group at the school have any impact from students using the Safe UT app? Does the Safe UT app interact with this threat assessment at all?
Chair, are you okay if I answer that question?
Please, Rep.
So the Safe UT app is a tool for schools, for students to submit various information based on the different criteria there. So there are ways, I mean, definitely the threats I mentioned earlier, they were, we have that data because it was submitted through the Safe UT app. So let's say that there's a threat that's submitted through the Safe UT app. The multidisciplinary team at the school would then assess that threat to determine if it's transient or substantive, which is to say, is it not serious or serious, and even very serious. And then they would make that determination and decide what those next steps are based on that decision tree process to help support them as they're evaluating that threat. And then as a multidisciplinary team at the school, we always recommend that it be a member of the school administration, as they're the ones who oversee, high scale stuff like that, especially as it's just crucial to have a school administrator there, local, the school-based mental health. And so, and I don't want to get too prescriptive there, because obviously with schools have different resources, so they'll make the determination as to what resources they can have on that team. That just kind of gives you a small example of what it would look like through the Safe UT app.
Thank you.
Yeah, don't see any other hands. Superintendent Dixon, you had your hand up momentarily. Is there something you wanted to add?
Oh, thank you, sir. It just goes back to Board Member Earle's inquiry, and I think it was an important question. It mirrors some of the policy that has come to us from the legislature, where they've delegated the board to determine either best practices or materials, vet materials, et cetera. And so it just made me think that perhaps there could be some policy development around a framework or scaffolding about what that might look like, so that as each of these independent items come to you as a board asking for, what is evidence or best practice, that there's some consistent methodology or framework that the board would use to approve, whether it's programs or training or whatever. So I'll circle back with members of my team, and maybe that's something that we could propose to this committee as a way to move forward. I really appreciated Board Member Earle's concern with just some of that general language. So if we had something that was more either systematic or systemic, however you want to frame that, I think it might be helpful in the future.
And I appreciate that. We had a discussion similar to this on the mental health screeners when we were talking about evidence-based, and that I guess the legislature is assuming that it will approve it, that it must be evidence-based, but we need to decide what that means inside USB. So that's a good one to put on the list going forward. I'm ready, I think, now for a motion if anybody would like to make one. Board Member Bellman.
I'll make.
I'm sorry, I was just trying to pull it up, so I apologize. I move that the committee approve the school threat assessment model policy for LEAs and the model policy for schools, and forward the policies to the board for approval.
Any discussion to that motion? Let me restate it then, and well, I should restate it now, I guess. The motion is that the committee approve the school threat assessment model policy for LEAs and the model policy for schools, and forward the policies to the board for approval. Is there any discussion? If not, let's go ahead and vote, and we'll just vote by the participants panel here, if you can do that. Can you help me, Patty and Noralee, just to make sure we get all these? It looks like we are unanimous. Is that what you see, Noralee? Okay, the motion passes then unanimously. Thank you. We'll go ahead and move on to
Board
our next.
Member Hanson, or Chair
yes.
Hanson, sorry. Red, if you guys are doing any training ever, will you let me know? I would be interested in attending, just in general. So.
You bet. We'd be happy to, Board Member Earl.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks for the support on that item. We'll move ahead then to item number 3. This is the Elementary School Counselor Grant Program. We have an amendment, and we were going to ask Jerry, I think, to help us just introduce this one to us. Is she here?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Please go ahead.
Jerry Sager, School Counseling Program Specialist, and Chair Hanson, we are bringing our 277461 Elementary School Counselor Grant Program forward today. This rule is being amended to clarify and streamline existing requirements for the grant application and subsequent reporting that was created 3 years ago. Also, the purpose of these changes is to reduce the burdens to LEAs. We have identified the requirements that we could adjust by updating language and removing data projects while still reporting on measurable goals and outcomes, and at the same time still aligning with the statute. In statute, there were 2 priorities. The first priority proposes to target funds to 1 or more elementary schools with high percentage of students exhibiting risk factors for childhood trauma. And the second priority proposes to target funds to 1 or more elementary schools with a high percentage of students experiencing intergenerational poverty. These priorities are still addressed in this rule, and although the changes to the rule look significant, the original intent and purpose still remain. If you have any questions, I'm here for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. And I'll state also, as I looked over this this agenda memo, I really appreciate the thoroughness there and giving us the background and what went into these revisions. Do we have any questions from board members about our 277-461-1? We're looking at draft 2, and I can explain that. Draft 1 was posted earlier. We had a pre-meeting, which in the future will happen, I think, before we post materials, but this month, because of the holiday in our schedule, it didn't happen. And so there were a couple of changes which are highlighted in blue that were made after the pre-meeting, and those are reflected in draft 2. So you have both draft 1 and draft 2 in front of you today. Let's see, Board Member Cannon's got her hand up. Please.
Yes, thank you. My questions were just, it looks like there has been some money provided for this, and I'm wondering how much money that is, how much funding is available, and how many LEAs that funding can provide grants for.
So it's 2.1 million, and the last 3-year cohort, we had approximately 60 counselors, social workers, and school psychologists hired in schools.
Thank you.
Board Member Earl's got her hand up, please.
Yes, my question is, we've listed off these risk factors, and there's two of them that I want to just ask about. And we struck the grade 3 proficiency, but I guess that's to indicate that it can be at any grade, right? But just because someone's performing below benchmark reading levels does not, I guess we're just saying that they're at risk, and those that are performing above that aren't necessarily at risk. Just help me understand what the thought process is there, because I'm not sure I'm fully understanding that. Or the measurement, it seems to be a little bit subjective, not objective to me.
Right, and the LEA, the school would make a goal based on where they think risk factors fall within their school. And so that would contribute to the risk factors. It wouldn't be only that benchmark would be the only risk factor, but all of those contribute into risk factors. And as you can see, we added the definition of what childhood trauma means, that they've been exposed to one or more traumas over the course of the child's life. And so there's many contributing factors to that. And lower reading can be part of what is shown. So that is why that's in there, to just have a measurement that can be looked at for these risk factors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it just seems to me that there could be some other, do we have any idea what the percent of kids that are below benchmark or grade 3 level really do fall into that category? Or do you know what I'm saying? Just because to me, that seems broad. And then the other one is the qualification for free or reduced price lunch. And I understand that would fall under poverty area, right? I mean, that's what we're looking at, right? Not having enough funding, but that certainly doesn't mean that they do. And I realize we're using several risk factors. I guess I'm questioning the subjectivity of those two, because they may be more of a stretch. They could, obviously, but I think it's above that could also, I don't know. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I just have a concern that we may be narrowing kids too much in some categories and maybe overlooking kids that need that help too.
Well, and I agree. We do have a scoring sheet that we used prior to my overseeing this grant, but there were behaviors and indicators that a school had to say was part of their application, and the office referrals, absenteeism, students in foster care, homelessness, DCFS referrals were all part of that too. And so as we look through the application process, we'll definitely, and I'm sure schools will too, specify that down to the children and make sure that they're getting the help that they need, rather than it being a general reading proficiency or free and reduced lunch.
I just would hate for us to miss some kids that really were in need because they didn't fit within that category, right? We're overlooking them because we're only looking at a couple of categories. Anyways, I know we've got a broad base, but.
Right, and thank you for bringing that. We'll address that as we work on this scoring sheet and their applications. Thank you.
And Board Member Earl, I kind of had some of the same questions. My understanding now is that these are just indicators. So these are things that maybe put a child more at risk for being a child who's experienced childhood trauma. And if there are several of those, then we need to look into it more. But it is subjective, and I think we're relying on our school teachers and psychologists and folks to look into this and make determinations. These are just kind of flags that they look for before they go forward with an investigation. We had, let's see, Board Member Belknap has a question.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually going to piggyback. I've got to go to my other screen, piggyback a little bit on this other discussion. So you said there's a definition of trauma. Are you using risk factors to denote trauma?
That's a great question. The risk factors, yes, denote trauma. It's really hard to quantify trauma. And like Chair Hansen was saying, that these are indicators that there could be trauma. So right now, as far as a measurement for childhood trauma, that's a difficult way to it's a difficult thing to measure.
Okay, so they're almost being used as synonyms. Okay, all right. My chair, may I continue?
Yeah, please continue, but I'm not sure that that statement's right, Laura, that they're used as synonyms. I think I had some questions about this too and look back. There's an ACE.
An ACE score.
Yeah, that you can look at. Maybe, Patty?
Yeah, sorry. I don't have the ability in hosting this to be able to raise my hand, so I apologize for that.
That's fine.
In here. But Jeff, if you could go to the second document that's been uploaded, and it talks about the elementary school counselor grant program and the definition of childhood trauma. On there is a link, and I think that is what most of this is based on. And so I don't know if you want to go to that piece, but that talks about the ACEs, the kind of the ACEs scores that we talked about before and what that looks like. And then you can delve further down into it, what those risk factors are and how they come back together.
Okay, maybe we can look at that quickly, Laura, and I think that helps my understanding of where we are.
I know the ACEs. Aren't there 9 ACEs? Are there 9 ACEs pieces? And so I do know about ACEs, but ACEs aren't necessarily risk factors. I mean, so like when I was saying that, I mean, they do provide risk for students. Okay. So that statement wasn't exactly what I wanted to say, but it seems like we're almost interchanging risk factors and trauma in this rule.
Well, I think we're saying that there's indicators for trauma rather than the factors and trauma are the same thing, if that makes sense.
Board Member Belknap, maybe is what you're saying. I think when we were talking about this, we were talking about things that happen to a child or may happen to a child. So that's an input. And then we're talking about the output, which is that risk factor that is exhibited, because we don't always know what the input is. We can only look to outward behaviors that then have that output. And maybe that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, that actually helps me. That helps me a ton. So thank you, Patty. So Chair, may I continue?
Please.
Okay, so my next question is who determines the risk factors? I know we've got some listed here. It says risk factors means behaviors or indicators including, but are there others that they can look at? And the reason I'm asking that, just so for clarity, are the districts allowed to add risk factors so that they can get the grant? That could be a pitfall there.
Well, and that's a great comment to have. And as we look at our scoring, that sure would be something that we could add to that. Right now, the scoring sheet asked how many mental health services they had in school, the behaviors and indicators that they are going to choose with their application, a goal statement and how they plan to mitigate, and then their goal implementation plan. And then a team would look at that and score these schools, but it would be totally up to the school and the LEA to establish what factors they're going to use within their application for this grant.
So one school here could have different risk factors than this school here when they send in their application for the grant.
Correct.
Are we?
But the ones listed would have to be included. That's the minimum list. Is that right?
Correct.
Well, not all.
They would be scored.
I thought it had to be one or more of these.
It looks to me like all those need to be included. It says "and" at the bottom, so all those on the list have to be included.
Okay, let me see. I keep going back and forth here.
It's 33 to 42.
33 to 42, thanks. Okay, so it has to include all of these. Okay, I see the.
So I read that, and correct me, Jerry, or other staff if I'm wrong, but I read that to mean that all these are included. They could be expanded. So if there are other things that a administrator, teacher, or whoever's looking at this notices that they think, may be an indicator of childhood trauma, then they can certainly use that as they, move forward. But that this would be the minimum list.
Chair, it's okay if I speak?
Yeah, please, Jerry.
Yes, so in the past, that is exactly, there is an accountability form, and they did report on these specific indicators. But as you say, they could expand on them and use them in their goal statements.
Okay, sorry. So they have to have all of these to be able to get the grant. The school has to have all of these.
Well, and as you look at them, it's really about the numbers, because I don't see any school that, they all have office referrals, absenteeism, their reduced lunch, their homelessness. So I don't see that. It's just more on the percentages that they have, and then what areas they want to concentrate on for their goal.
And Board Member Belknap, maybe a better way of putting it is they have to respond to all of those in their application. And then depending on their responses, what is coming in, that's how it would be scored.
And so can you give me an example of this, Patty? I don't mean to beat this, but so for example, an elementary school, and they don't have high absenteeism, but they have, every school has some, but they have all the other indicators. Would that be a reason not to finish the rubric for them? Or is there something that is going, do we have the rubric and the determination now of what they have to have, or are we allowing them to come in and we're being more arbitrary?
Well, and honestly, I'm just going by history of what happened 3 years ago. But at that point, what happened prior, and this scoring sheet, of course, can be changed and edited and reviewed, but they did receive points for where they fell in those. And then, like for the behaviors and indicators, if they reported on them and their percentage, then that was 20 points. But it doesn't look like, to be frank, that was the basis on them being eliminated, or and I would hope that we would make our scoring sheet, and I want to see this through, is that no one would be eliminated for having a low percentage of absenteeism. They would just need to report on that. So.
And Chair, this is Jeff Van Holten. I can add to this if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, please, Jeff.
I just put up on the screen the statute that surrounds this grant program, and I want to draw your attention to number 3 right here that I'm highlighting. This is how the grant is awarded, and you'll notice that first priority has to be given to an LEA that proposes to target funds to one or more elementary schools with a high percentage of students exhibiting risk factors for childhood trauma. And I do want to point out down here below, you were then instructed by the statute to define in a rule what that means. What is a risk factor for childhood trauma? So in looking at that list, I do think Board Member Belknap, you are correct. The list, as it states, is a minimum. The school would look at those factors, and if they have high percentages of all of those at a minimum, they would be slated as first priority schools for the grant. If they want to add others and how that affects the scoring, to be frank, the way the statute reads and the way that the rule reads, I don't know that that would bump them up in getting first priority, because it's all based on your definition of risk factors for childhood trauma that you have in rule. That's really what will trigger if they get the first priority. I hope that helps.
Chair, thank you. I just would like a sidebar answer. It doesn't have to come today, but I'd like to know if free and reduced lunches are the same and equivalent across every school in the state? Do they measure the same? And if somebody could just send me that later. Thanks.
Okay, I think that we might be able to get a quick answer on that one, but I believe Leah Voorhees is here as well. Did you have something that you could add, Leah, on this one?
Yes, Chair, thank you. So I think a little bit of a conversation back, a really important issue related to the definition of childhood trauma is that the persistent, like to what Patty was saying, individuals, humans, respond differently to trauma. Some experience trauma and are able to move through it quickly and easily, and some do not. Their response changes their behavior, and the key for intervening is it a marked response, and how long does it last? Is there an adverse reaction, and does the reaction persist over time? And so there are risk factors, and some people might respond one way, other people might experience those risk factors and just move through without a response, and or possibly with a short response, not a persistent response. And really the key for therapeutic intervention is what type of response and how long does it persist? And that's really the definition of experience, the behavior to be able to determine if a student is exhibiting behavior related to trauma. Has there been an adverse reaction, and is it a persistent reaction?
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I forget to turn off my mute. I appreciate the response. Hopefully that added to our conversation for the board members on the committee. I wondered if there's a quick answer on the free and reduced lunch. My understanding is that those guidelines are consistent among all the schools. Is that right?
Correct. It is a federal guideline in making those determinations and calculations across the state based on income.
Thank you. Looks like board member Earl has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. This is a money question, so to speak, and it's relevant because if we're measuring against, right, certain criteria and they're able to add or whatever, do we fund all the applications that are turned in? Have we previously funded? Let me ask that. Or are we turning people away?
Previously, there were some that were turned away. Okay. Yeah, there wasn't money to go around.
Is there a set amount, or do we make that decision?
So the LEA has to match half of what they get. And so they can either receive $50,000 for one FTE, which then they would contribute 25, and then they can get enough for a half FTE, which would be 25,000, and then they contribute.
Okay. And then this is relevant to the free and reduced lunch currently where everybody's eating at school, meaning are we getting accurate numbers of our free and reduced lunch kids? Does that make sense? Are they still turning in applications for that, I guess is what I'm saying, or is that, where all children are being fed, are we going to be getting an accurate representation?
Are you asking about the COVID effect, Jenny?
Yeah. I mean, the long-term effect of that, because people are getting the free and reduced lunch, are they still submitting so that we have accurate numbers according to what we're measuring a lot of things on? So.
No, Deputy Superintendent Norman.
Yeah. Board Member Earl, can we follow up with that? We're going to talk with Director Kathleen Britton, and then we can follow up after this with an email to the board.
Yeah, that would be great. I'm just curious on that one. So, yeah.
And it does look like Superintendent Dix might be able to answer that as well.
If I may, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, please go ahead, Superintendent.
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons that the federal government, the Department of Agriculture, actually, I know I'm not stating the right department, it's not in the Department of Education, but that's one of the reasons actually that they took away some of that they created waivers and took away some of the barriers for the very reason that the mobility of families and some of the issues surrounding COVID just increased, insurmountable, and having to fill out the forms, there were just a lot of people that weren't filling them out. Because remember, that means often coming into school, those aren't always digitally available. And if they are, they're broadband issues. So there were all these inequities created that people couldn't come into the school and just fill out the forms and turn them in. So you're absolutely right. This year, we don't have an accurate count because of the conditions. So next year, it'll be interesting to see how that shifts.
Okay, because we have all kids on free and reduced lunch right now. Well, free lunch, sorry.
Yeah,
there is no lunch, right?
Right. We took away the label and just have the ability to provide lunch and breakfast for whomever wants to engage.
Okay.
Yeah, it looks like we have Janet, and then we'll go to Brent. Board Member Cannon.
Yes, I'm thinking about this in terms of money again. And it looks like this money is used to hire personnel, these elementary counselors. And so we've already got 60 of them. Is this money, this $2.1 million, is that ongoing money? Does it continue to provide money to keep these people hired with the matching funds from the district? And do we get more or more to enlarge this program or to bring it to more? We've got something 900 elementary schools and we've gotten 60 elementary counselors through this grant. Will you explain to me how this money works, how we are sustaining the people that we have brought on and how we bring more on?
Can I comment to that, Chair Hansen?
Mary, I think you're probably the best one to field that one, please.
So, and that is a result. This is a competitive grant. And so because the 3-year cohort will be ending at the end of this school year, LEAs will have to reapply. And then based on their application, whether they will be admitted to participate in the grant or not. And there is no guarantee that those employees that they have hired will retain the funds that they have previously had. And I know that 373 has allowed for more monies, but with this grant, like I say, it's competitive, and so they have to start all over again.
Does that answer your question, Board Member Cannon?
Yeah, it looks to me like we're doing a little bit. There's a lot more that needs to be done, and I'm feeling some heartache for those elementary counselors who were hired and are now, the cohort's ending, and they may or may not be able to continue on. So, thank you for explaining how that works.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move to Brent now for question.
All right. So if I remember right, these grants almost felt like a pilot program. That's probably not quite the right word. But moving on, do we have the data to show that this program has been effective in helping students? And then I have a follow-up for that.
Can I speak to that?
Jerry, please.
So as a requirement, which is one of the things we've changed a little bit, every year schools were required to submit a data project where they were addressing the goals that they were that they listed in their application. And then they do report on the outcomes. every year of how they're coming along with those goals. And so, yes, we do have the data to show what the counselors or social workers or school psychologists have been able to achieve in their schools.
Okay, so this is probably not something for now, but is it time to, is it an equity issue if we do not provide these services to all students in regards to who have these factors?
I'm not sure who would be best to address that. Is that something that you would feel, Jerry, or is there someone else on staff that might want to comment?
I'm not really comfortable answering that, if you want to know the truth. I see that we are not providing to all students, and it is not equitable, but with a competitive grant, I don't know how, unless, I mean, and we want to go to legislature and have elementary counselors in every school, but at this time, we don't have the funds to do that. So if someone else wants to talk to that, I'm more than happy.
Okay, we do, just being mindful of time, we have a couple more hands up and we have several more items on the agenda today. My understanding is we have a given pot of money. That money comes up every 3 years for award. We're trying to distribute that to the areas where it can be used most effectively. So the highest risk areas for childhood trauma. And so we've got these criteria that we're using to have people provide us data on their risk level, and then we can divvy out the funds to the areas that need it the most at that point of time when the funds are sent out. I think right now our job is to get the funds out to the best area, and that's probably the question for us: is this method and the rule that we have now, is that sufficient to do that? Is that the way that we want to proceed, going forward? I don't know that we can redefine the program in our committee right now. We're just trying to implement and get the money out. So I don't know if that helps with any of the questions that are coming up. I'd want to hear from everyone, but we also need to be moving forward. Janet, did you have more that you wanted to look at?
I'm sorry, I forgot to put my hand down.
Okay, and Jenny, you've got your hand up as well.
Just one quick comment. So continuation in this program is based on not on improvement, but on the highest need. So if you want to continue, you've got to be one of the highest needs, and which might put us at risk of people being really cautious not to get, I don't know. Do you know what I'm saying? Are we, anyways, hopefully, yeah, I guess if you're making progress, we're not really rewarding you.
Maybe I can comment quickly on that. I don't, and please correct me, staff, if I'm seeing it wrong, but I think the risk factors are more associated with the demographics of the area and what's going on. There are a few that are actual behaviors of the kids, like the absenteeism and the discipline reports, but you've also got kids cycling through these schools as well. So this isn't the same kids necessarily that we're dealing with every 3-year cycle. This is the next batch of kids that's in the school. And if some areas are just going to probably be more at risk for childhood trauma because of the neighborhoods that they're in and the demographics and conditions in that area. So I understand what you mean. You could sandbag this so that you don't show any improvement, but a lot of these are really out of the school's control. I mean, they get DCFS reports. They don't have anything. The school doesn't have anything to do with that. They just log, we are getting DCFS reports, and then they're reporting on it. So is that accurate? Is that staff? Am I stating that correctly?
That makes more sense than the concern over progress. So thank you.
Laura, I see your hand up and I hope you're ready to make a motion for us.
Yeah, yes, I am. I actually am not sure if we have 2 motions or 1 motion here. Do we have 2?
I thought it was just 1. Let's take a look real quick.
Well, then I'll make this motion that the committee approve our 277461 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
Could I ask Board Member Belknap? We did make the correction. We made a couple of additions. This is draft 2 that we're considering.
Okay, thank you. I'll add that.
Okay, we do have a motion then before the committee. The motion is that the committee approve R277461 draft 2 on first reading and forward it to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any comments to the motion? Laura, you've still got your hand up. No? Okay, we'll go ahead. And I'm not seeing a vote from Janet.
I voted, but my little green check goes away.
Okay, do you want to vote orally then?
My vote is yes, aye.
Okay. So Nora Lee, I've got that one passing unanimously. Is that what you see?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. We will move on.
Thank you, board members.
We're now on number 4 on the agenda. This is R277716, Alternative Language Services for Utah students. It's a continuation, and I think Jeff was going to speak to this.
Yes, and just very quickly, this rule is the Alternative Language Services for Utah Students rule. Just some background. You as a board actually amended this rule back in 2019 in the full board meeting of May, and it went, I believe, to the Law and Licensing Committee in April of 2019, where there were actually some substantive changes made. At that time, the rule was not continued, however, and it is now turned 5 years old, which means you have to decide if you want to keep it or get rid of it. And staff is definitely asking you keep it. So you're not going to see any current amendments here. Christelle Estrada is present. There might be a couple of quick changes we may need to make, but otherwise, that's pretty much the rule. And she's present to answer any questions you may have. This is related to Title III funding.
Okay, and Jeff, when you mentioned quick changes we may need to make, can you elaborate on that?
I believe Christelle had mentioned in an email to me there might be a couple reference change, and we may not. I'll just defer to Christelle if there's a couple of quick corrections we need to make.
Okay, Christelle, could you bring those before us before we have questions so that we're dealing with the
Yes, I would. Thank you, Board Member Hanson. So, Jeff, would you go down to line 55, where it says 55, state-approved endorsement program, or SAEP, means a professional development plan or which a licensed Utah educator is working to obtain an endorsement. That doesn't exist anymore. The SAEP has actually changed in the licensing department in relationship to revision as referred to in R277-301. So, and if you look at the teacher qualifications, we've expanded it to make it more responsive to the needs of LEAs, which is also part of this rule. So the only thing we would do with line 55 through 56 is just delete that. And I also worked with Jennifer Thronson on this as well in the licensing department. And I'm open to any questions.
Okay, so if my understanding is correct, we would be amending draft 1 to delete lines 55 and 56, and then that would entail some renumbering as well. But that's the change that staff feels needs to be made?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, let's go to the committee then for questions with that understanding. And I've got Janet at the top of my list, and then Laura, and then Jenny. Janet, please.
Thank you. I guess I'm concerned about money today, but my question goes to these Title III funds, and I'm wondering how much the Title III funds are, and I'm wondering if we have a way to track whether or not all of the districts and schools are utilizing these Title III funds to benefit these ELL children?
Yes, I'll respond to that. And thank you, Janet, Board Member Cannon. Nice to see you. It's really interesting. The Title III funds, we actually get $4.2 million. And there's a distribution formula approved by the federal government. And so those allocations are sent out. And the application that I use, as well as a self-assessment tool, is the way in which both Tammy Long and I monitor how it is that LEAs are using Title III funds effectively. Because, as you know, federal funding cannot supplant what the civil rights regulations are related to ensure that state funds are being used to support students learning English. And remember, this legislation goes back to the 1960s in relationship to mitigating the kind of barriers that would have an impact on students learning another language. And the reason I'm saying another language is many of the students that I actually work with, this is like their third language. So English is a third language, not just a second language. And as you saw from the board presentations, the actual recognitions and awards that we presented to the elementary schools, as well as to the high schools, and then this month to the middle schools, it shows that the way in which districts are braiding their funds with state funds as well as federal funds and at-risk funds is making a huge difference for specific schools that are now recognized as exemplary schools for English learners. So I hope that answers your question, Board Member Cannon.
Thank you. May I follow up? I know at one point in time, Christelle and I had a conversation, and it was about some kind of funding that was supposed to be going to these kids and wasn't being used. And I don't remember where that funding was. Do you remember that at all, Christelle?
Yeah, I think the challenge is, and I'll just say this from a very interesting learning perspective, from my viewpoint. There had been school improvement funding, and then Dr. Donaldson that hadn't been used, and then we got a waiver for it. And so we ended up identifying schools, specific schools that were identified for targeted school improvement for English learners, so students learning English. And we provided them with, it was something like $1.2 million. So when I was focusing on the work that I was doing with them, I made it very clear that they should go to the principals and ask the principals directly what they saw as the learning needs of students. When I first came into this position, unfortunately, there were funds that had been sent back to the federal government. But because of the redesign of the actual application and the monitoring of those funds related to using data and the self-assessment tool related to supporting schools and districts in evaluating the effectiveness of their programs, that's been mitigated. So if you actually look, we have not returned funds to the federal government, which really makes me happy, because when you return funds, the implication is you don't really need them.
Yes.
Right.
Exactly.
So we worked really hard with LEAs to use their funds more effectively related to the actual needs of the students in the schools with feedback from the principals.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. It looks like we have Board Member Earl next with questions.
Yeah, I'll try to ask. I have several questions. I'll try to ask them consecutively. They don't have to be long answers necessarily. But on line 111, it talks about conducting monitoring every 5 years. Are we finding that our programming, that most of these monitorings are successful? In other words, the programs you're going out to, they're doing what this rule asks them to do, or are we finding a lot of deficits?
That's actually a really great question. We redesigned the monitoring so that we could include content specialists throughout the agency. Because one of the things that they asked us, the federal government asked us, is how are you ensuring that students learning English have access to grade level content, right? So, that's kind of a different question in relationship to becoming proficient in English. So we ended up designing a monitoring program that actually focused first on feeder patterns with everybody in the agency, which included teaching and learning specialists, assessment specialists, special ed people. And we went out and we visited classrooms, and then we had focus groups with families, focus groups with instructional coaches, focus groups with districts. And then when we gave the report back to them, we actually made commendations for specific teachers that we saw were doing really amazing work. And then kind of systemic recommendations for the district to support the schools in specific ways. And then they responded in the Utah grant system, and they could choose which recommendations they were going to address. We've had some of the best conversations with families. I have transcripts. You would actually be proud of the work and the effort that everybody in the agency on a team has actually collaborated in a way to give the kind of feedback and commendations to practices that are really exemplary, and also recommendations to change what they're doing. So it's a great question.
Great. I'm over, I see Logan School District, and I've done a number of visits there, and they have been working on some very specific systemic things within their, throughout the whole district. And so I've been very impressed with that. I just wondered how that was working. On line 144, it talks about approved curricular materials. Are we getting adequate approval for curricular materials? Do we have the materials we need to do what we need to do? That it doesn't have to be yes, no. We could use some improvement. I don't know.
Yeah, that's actually a brilliant question. And the reason it's so important is that the Instructional Materials Commission and the rule that's actually connected to that creates this environment where teachers come and they evaluate instructional materials with recommendations and even challenges to publishers. So we have a really great track record of doing that. So thank you for asking that.
Yeah, the next question just has to do with the written notice in a language. This is 165 referring to parents. Are we adequately, do you feel like most of our districts, and we have the resources to get this information to parents in the languages or such?
Now, the reason this is really important is on the Title III website, every required notification is actually written in 7 and translated in 7 different languages. So we've provided all the standardized support for notification. And then through the Chief Privacy Officer, we actually identified 3 districts as a pilot program to do oral language translation services, because many families, aren't literate in their own language, so they need oral translations. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I just wanted to make sure we were doing that. We were getting to what we put into policy over the last several years, that we're actually able to. Okay, thank you. And thank you for all the hard work you do for our students. I appreciate, and families. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Board Member Earl. I appreciate your questions. Very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move then to Board Member Straight.
Yes, I appreciate Board Member Earl bringing up line 144. I'd like to bump up to 135 for just a second. When we're updating this, are we going to change that from ESL to ELL? Or is that term still sufficient? And just a comment on 144 and 5. Sometimes, and this is one of the difficult things, is turning policy into practice. And I hope we can continue just working on that, and we work on our end to the best of our ability. But sometimes I think we're not getting the water to the end of the row when it comes to what happens in the classroom.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Board Member Straight. The actual official term, based on the way in which the federal law was changed, is English learners, because English language learners is redundant. So English is a language, and if you put language with English, so the actual federal legislation is EL. ESL really focuses on English as a second language, and the reason that's done that way is that it really focuses on the way in which teachers are prepared for the endorsement for an ESL endorsement in relationship to the TESOL standards. So I hope that answers your question, and it's a very excellent question. Thank you.
So, Christelle, just for clarification, then ESL is the proper term. We shouldn't be making any changes to that based on current understanding and usage?
Yes, that's correct, because it's not defining the student, right? It's actually saying that an ESL content-based program is designed for students learning English as a second language, which is actually based on standards related to how teachers are endorsed.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Does that answer your questions then, Brent?
Yes, I learned something.
Okay. That's the thing about these committee meetings. We're all learning the whole time, I think. It's amazing to me, the depth of knowledge with our staff. I sure appreciate their contributions. Laura, it looks like you have something for us.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion, please, that the committee continue R277716 on as amended on first reading and forward to the board for continuation on second and final reading. And the amendment was to remove lines 55 and 56.
Okay, thank you for that. I will restate the motion if I can get it in front of me here. I'm on another page. The motion before the committee is that the committee continue R277716 as amended on first reading and forward to the board for continuation on second and final reading. Is there any discussion to that motion? I just had one quick question that I need to ask. Laura beat me with the motion to asking the question. I'm on lines 223 and 224. And this is an interesting piece of the rule where it allows a consortium of smaller LEAs or LEAs with lower numbers of English language learners to get together and act together. But I wondered if we are in those consortiums, if we're compliant with 223 and 224, that says that the fiscal agent's going to act and assume all of the responsibilities of an LEA, which would include contacting parents and students for everyone that's in the consortium. Is that working?
Yes, it is. In fact, it's interesting because when I first came to this position, it wasn't done specifically in relationship to regions. So we have rural districts who are the fiscal agent, like Duchesne, and they have like several other LEAs that they work with, and they're very accountable. North Summit, South Summit is an example. And the thing that's interesting about this is we now have charter consortiums who are working together in a really impressive way. So we have Pacific Heritage and Endeavor working together, and then we have another charter, Gateway Charter, that has 4 or 5 other charter schools that are connected to them. And they sign an MOU that outlines exactly what their responsibilities are. And all that monitoring ends up going through the Utah grant system. So it's a great question. Previously, based on the federal audit in 2014, we weren't exactly in compliance. But since then, the LEAs have stepped up and have been responsive, and they work with each other in charters, which I really love, because when I first did that, I would do the regions and send the list out to all the charter schools in that region. and there were charter schools that had, a fairly sufficient amount of money. But the challenge to have a fiscal agent be that responsible was really challenging. But now we have charters stepping up. So, we actually have something to really be proud of, the work that charters are doing with each other. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. I always worry it's hard to implement those kind of situations where we have lots of different schools trying to act together, but it's good that that's working. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If there are no other questions or comments, we'll go ahead and vote on the motion. Oh. And Janet, I see your hand up. Is that a vote?
Well, my little green check keeps going away. So last night I was doing both of them. I thought I'd try that in this meeting too.
No problems. When you've got your hand up, I'm going to assume that you're voting aye, unless you tell me otherwise.
That's right.
And everyone else, let's see. There's Brent. Looks like we're unanimous on this one. Is that right, Noralee?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. And we'll move forward to the next item.
So can I just thank everybody individually for their really, really wonderful questions, because there's so much to learn about the way we work with students learning another language. And, they're really a great asset, and many of our schools are just doing extraordinary work. So I just want to thank each of you for being so responsive and asking such good questions.
Thank you. This item is the pre-K 6 Social Studies Standards Revision Update. It's an information item, and we'll ask Robert Austin to kind of lead us through this and let us know what's happening. Just a reminder to everyone, we have about 1 hour left in the meeting, so hopefully that'll guide our discussion and questions. But go ahead, Robert. Oh, do we have Robert here?
Yes. Okay, good.
Okay.
I am here. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Robert Austin. I'm the K-12 Social Studies Specialist. I'm going to start my video so you can actually see that I really do exist other than my photograph. So the purpose for my presence here today is to just update you on where we stand regarding the elementary social studies revision process. And I think events yesterday remind us just how important social studies education is today. We have an incredible committee of teachers who are working diligently on the revision of the standards. And, when they say that education isn't rocket science, well, they're wrong. It's a really complicated process to create thoughtful, exemplary standards that will prepare our students for the greatest obligation they have, which is that of citizenship. So you will see that I've laid out some of the thinking that our teachers are doing right now in their work and in the writing committee. And essentially, today is just a chance to let you know where things stand. We hope to come together as writers in January and in February with enough of a complete draft that we can bring that back to the Standards and Assessment Committee meeting in March for your initial consideration. The really important thing for this committee to understand is that there's a specific process laid out in standards revision that is your process as a board, and that we will make sure that we follow that process as fully and as completely as possible and as iteratively as possible, which means if we come to a committee meeting position where additional work needs to be completed, we will take that charge on and continue the work. I really try to work with all of the folks who come to the table regarding this important work, assuming best intentions on the part of all. And that's what we want. We want the absolute best standards for our Utah students. The standards process timeline is laid out in a couple different documents. We're at step 6, which means we're still writing away. These are writing teams of teachers who are working in grade bands, also juggling the pandemic and their classroom instruction and doing a really thoughtful and incredible job. So I'm happy to answer any specific questions regarding the process, and look forward to soon bringing a draft that I've already warned them. I said the writing is not about your ego, it's about what's best for students. And so expect that we will get lots of great feedback and finish at the end of the road with standards that we can be very proud of as Utahns.
Thank you, Robert. Committee members, it looks like we have committee member, board member Earl with the question. You go ahead there.
Yeah, and I am familiar with the process. I just maybe want to let you know what I will be looking for when those come forward. And it is, matching up with the law as much as what other recommendations are and teachers are seeing on the ground. So I'm just maybe giving you a heads up, not so much the process, but more of the things that we'll be evaluating with, and especially the civics and character education law and how critical that is. And I know you know that, you've talked about that before. I do have some question. Oh shoot, I do have a question on, and I understand kids at all levels can have deeper level thinking and cognitive rigor. So I am curious what that exactly interprets to for young children when it comes to civics and character ed, because to me that seems very basic. And from what you're saying, maybe it's more complex than what I'm thinking. I would think that would be some of those natural things that kids that age do actually engage with one another and
right.
Things. So maybe you could give me an example of maybe what that looks like, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, I think that you're right, Board Member Earl, in that they especially in the early grades, the kindergarten and first grade, what those standards writers were really referencing was that they feel like they're encouraging the standards to go beyond just like memorizing symbols, for example, or understanding that this Capitol building is a symbol for this country, but to actually also engage in how is it that we create community? What roles do community helpers play in the community, and how can we support them? And so I think that's what they were excited about, and I think that that's what they'll see is a little more of that kind of deeper thinking. Still, again, at the kindergarten level. I mean, we're not talking about the kinds of things that we might be thinking about, even when students are in 4th, 5th, or 6th grade. The important thing for all of us is to realize that, one of my favorite phrases is the soft bigotry of low expectations, and what we want are high expectations for all of our students, so that we don't. We raise a good bar, and we have a high bar of expectations, and then we provide the kind of instruction that will help students reach that level.
Yeah, of course we want a high bar, which leads into one more comment, if that's okay, Chair Hansen. And it was something we talked about a little bit yesterday with Representative Johnson, and that's that. Actually, let me give an illustration real quick, and then I'll discuss that. Just when my daughter went to take piano lessons, we switched piano teachers, and she had a pretty rigorous requirement to even walk in the door, and it was basic skill level type of things before you could even show up on day one. She had to pass those off. And I, as we go throughout civics and character ed, there should be still, when I say rigor, there should be things that are automatically understood and not just the application of an idea, like rendering service, but not understanding elements of liberty. Anyway, so once again, with the action education in civics, they're finding that just because students go out and perform certain things, they aren't understanding the basis behind them. So I hope once again that our educators are making sure we're getting foundational information actually taught and not just the action behind it. So it's a good combination, but not overlooking one for the other or misinterpreting that would be considered civics education. So that's all my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like Laura has her hand up.
Thank you, Chair. Robert, this is actually a comment, and it actually comes between where we are on number 6 and going to number 7A. I've been here long enough that many times standards will come to us in 7A and we'll have concerns and comments, and the response back is, we've spent so much time on this, it's really hard to change. I would just ask that not be a response if the committee has concerns moving forward. Thank you. Thank you, Robert.
Laura, just to piggyback on that, I heard Robert say that we're going to check egos at the door, and I know that's hard for all of us, but especially the committee that's invested so much time in putting this together. But it is an iterative process, and hopefully you can get that to us with enough time before the meeting that we'll be able to put some good thought into it and have good comments and questions for you at the time of the meeting, and it won't drag out into one or more or another month that we have to go through that. But we appreciate our writing committee and also appreciate their tolerance of us, because I'm sure we'll have questions and suggestions as well. And I imagine this is a fairly substantial rewrite. Is that right on these?
Yes, it is, Chair Hansen. Yep.
Jenny, I see your hand still up. Is there anyone else that has a comment or question? Okay, well, we sure appreciate the update today, Robert, and we'll look forward to some great work from the committee here in the next month or two.
Thank you very much, and thanks for all your work, all of you. It's always a civics lesson to watch a committee like this.
Yeah, thank you. So we are committee moving forward, and that takes us to the assurance documents. This is item number 6 on our agenda, R277-108. I believe that we have Mr. Van Holten here to introduce this one to us. Are you here, Jeff?
I am. I apologize for the lighting in my room. I've done everything, and you can kind of see me.
Yeah, you're looking a little dark.
It is where my computer has to be in this room makes me look like I am in witness protection once again, which is probably for the best. So this is R277-108, the annual assurances document. Those who have been on this committee in the last year will remember we bring this in every January. There's an assurance document list that we send out to LEAs at the beginning of May every year. We have to send it at least by June 1st, but typically it's sent out by around May 1st. And they have until July 1st to fill out all the assurances. There's been a lot of discussion around this. Who are new to this committee, just to give you some context of the discussion, there's been a lot of questions about whether or not this is a useful document, whether this document is too long, and why are we doing this? What is the purpose of the document, and so forth. As you also may recall, we have had a recent legislative audit regarding reporting requirements and being asked to reduce reporting requirements on LEAs. This particular document actually came up twice in the legislative committee discussion as a point of pain for LEAs in terms of reducing the burden of reports. So what you're going to see before you here is we do intend to send out the list again, but everything that is highlighted in green, all the rows highlighted in green on this document are areas that we are suggesting do not need to be on the assurance document list anymore. We can delete these. We can list, let LEAs feel a little bit better about a shorter list this year. And then we can maybe discuss further at the prerogative of the chair some other ideas that we have moving forward in the long term with this list. The list was created originally for federal purposes. The financial operations team keeps the list on file in case the federal government ever audits the particular assurances that we were required to get from LEAs. The methodology that was used to select the green rows, why are we deleting these over others? First, we left all the federal requirements currently on the list. We'll need to do a bigger, deeper dive on that list later. So everything in white is mostly federal. We also then looked at the statute or the rule that was cited for the reason that there's an assurance to see if it actually says an assurance is required. And you'll notice in that column, the vast majority of these do not actually have a statutory requirement to have some kind of assurance. Then we also went further and said, ask staff, do you use the information from this list? If statute doesn't require it, it's a state requirement that we're citing, not federal. So does staff use it? And for all the ones that were highlighted in green, the answer was no. We do not use the assurance document to collect this information. We get it in other ways. So that is why we chose these particular assurances to be deleted, because essentially they were all just legal requirements in code, but there's really no rhyme or reason to why these legal requirements versus others. So it made more sense that as everyone's looking for shorter lists, less reporting, that we could start there with the low-hanging fruit. But perhaps I'll stop there and pause and see if there are any questions or comments, and we can kind of take the discussion from there, Chair.
Thank you, Jeff. And maybe I can just add a couple of comments before we go to committee members. This assurance document came into being, as I understand it, looking into the history, by board rule. The board put it in place to try to consolidate all these different assurances to make sure that the LEAs were being compliant with all the requirements that are in rule and law and federal code. So that's how it started. As you know, we have a lot of education bills run every year. And so every year there were more laws that came into effect and then more rules. And that means more assurances. And this thing grew and grew and grew. The actual usage of the assurance document, as Jeff said, there are some areas like in the federal requirements where I think this is our evidence in some respects. And so we're not able to get rid of it without putting ourselves at some risk in those areas. But there are other areas where no one's using the data. But the assurance itself, from some things we learned in our audit committee, doesn't seem to be very effective. We had assurances from LEAs who then, after an audit, it showed that they weren't compliant in some of the areas that were being assured as far as compliance goes. So we do have to have, according to rule, we have to have this assurance document out each year to the LEAs by June 1st is what's in the rule. The practice has been to have it out by May 1st so that the LEAs could look at it, and it needs to be submitted back to us by July 1st. So what staff has proposed and what is proposed now for action by the committee is that we try to reduce, by eliminating these items, try to reduce the assurance document for this year. And in the meantime, I would envision this will come right back on our agenda as we look into how best do we ensure compliance of the LEAs and what is USBE's role in assuring that compliance, and how can we make sure that the LEAs are aware of what they need to do by law and rule and federal code, and then that they're complying with that. So this is kind of a stopgap that we're looking at today, and I hope that maybe we can use that as a lens as we have our conversation about what to do right now. But I don't think this is the end of the assurance document discussion in this committee. So with that being said, any comments? It looks like Jenny's got her hand up.
So let me make sure I understand. We're voting on whether to accept the ones they're suggesting to have removed from the assurance document. Is that right? Or
So
we're making
the update, yeah, as I understand it, and Patty's there to keep me in line. As I understand it, that we are voting to amend the rule to update it to reference this new document, the new assurance document. That needs to be done every year. And the new document would have all the green eliminated for this year. And then the action item for us is in the next year, before this comes out, to do a really comprehensive look at what is the purpose of this assurance document, what is USB's role in doing this assurance of compliance, what's necessary, what's required, and how's it being used, and is there a better way to do this? So it's a big discussion that happens after this, but I didn't see any way that we could do all of that in the next month or so that we need, because this has to go to the board for approval and then get out to the schools by May 1st is the deadline that we've internally been using.
So that which we have on here means that it's important to us. Would that be accurate? Whether or not, anyways, and there's three specific things that stand out to me that I would remove from the green. The national motto, the Pledge of Allegiance, to me, whether or not our monitoring shows they're doing that, it says this is important. And then the third one would be Utah Educator Professional Standards. The only reason why is because often in our UPAC meetings, there's that question of, are they getting trained, kind of a thing. I don't know if this just keeps it, or if it just happens, kind of a thing, or if this just keeps that on the forefront. This is a priority so that your educator should know. So I don't know if I need to make a motion for that, or if this
let's let staff address that with us and just tell us what process they went through to put that in the green. And then we can certainly move forward with the motion if that's appropriate. So Jeff and Darren, I think, are the ones that spent the most time on this. Maybe they can help us understand.
I can address the first two, and then I might defer to Darren and possibly Jennifer on the professional standards. On the national motto and the Pledge of Allegiance, there was no assurance required by statute. It is just a requirement by law. And there is currently actually no staff that uses this data or checks this data. So that is why it checked both those boxes of no one uses it and is not actually required to be on the assurance document. I think that's a really interesting point, Board Member Earl, that you bring up of, are these things the things we feel are the most important? That's a good question, because this is a very random hodgepodge of different legal requirements. We talked to Debbie Davis earlier today. She pointed out there's over 1,600 legal requirements for LEAs currently. This definitely does not even get near to, I think we get to like maybe 70 or 80 on this list. So not even touching all the legal requirements an LEA should be adhering to. So that is why I don't think anyone would balk at keeping it or getting rid of it. But the reason why is there's no explicit requirement for it, and there's no staff checking this data currently. And I'll defer to Darren on the professional standards.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, in terms of the Utah Educator Professional Standards and the LEA's requirement or expectation they provide training on those, removing this line from the assurance document doesn't remove that responsibility from the LEAs. The question, I guess, is for the committee to decide is leaving it on the assurance document, does it bring about changes in behavior in the LEA or not? And that's points to the broader question that Chair Hansen's talked about that we really need to spend more time on. And I know we talked about this a year ago and talked about coming back a year from now and trying to make improvements. But this is an iterative process that will, I think, the work regarding not just the assurance document, but the reporting requirements and how to provide more supports for higher levels of compliance. Those discussions will likely never go away.
Let's see, we've got a few more hands up. Maybe before a motion, we can entertain those questions. Is that all right, Jenny? And then we'll go from there. Let's go to Laura and then Janet.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, I have a couple. Scott, I'm just so on your page, Chair, about what is the requirement then? What's the follow-up and so on and so forth. But it was disconcerting to me to hear that last year we had the same conversation and really not much has changed because of it, other than maybe picking a few that fit the criteria that was laid out. I'm just wondering if we don't push this down the road a little bit, and I know that it needs to be done by May 1st. If there's any way to really look over these, for example, Jenny has a couple that she was particularly curious as to why they're being taken off, and they're important to her. But is it something that we should be evaluating at our level, or should that be at the local level? And maybe we need a little more time on that. The other thing is have we looked, is there any way for these assurances to be uploaded in our new USIMS programs moving forward, and it's not necessarily a checkbox of an assurance, but we know by the assurance that it's there because of what's required in there? And have we checked with legal to make sure that we're not removing or putting ourselves, like Scott stated, in harm's way, that when someone's not compliant, what recourse or what help, either way, could we give them if we don't know that it's happening? So I don't know if we're ready, but maybe staff has some better help for me.
Jeff, is that one you'd want to respond to, or Darren?
I can start and anyone can back me up. Sorry, I can't raise my hands. I'm technically a co-host of the meeting. Those are really great questions, Board Member Belknap. And unfortunately, the deeper dive that was supposed to happen last year got sidelined because of all the COVID response needs. This was not at the top of the priority list, unfortunately. So we do come back a year later with not nearly as much work done as we had hoped. But I think there's a whole host of questions that need to be asked in relation to what do we want this document to be? What is its purpose? The history of the document, I think, is telling. It used to be only for the federal assurances. And over time, the idea of consolidating different staff's efforts to follow up on certain data pieces was really why this began to grow. But there was never really a collective movement around that, saying we as an agency and as a board are going to put everything that we check on one document. So it's kind of a Christmas tree with its random ornaments. And there's also another question of which legal requirements need to be on this and why are others not? And it's really hard to answer that, especially as we have staff turnover as well. This document has passed through many hands in terms of who's in charge of it internally. So the reason why we offered up the ones that we did and decided to take the iterative process is because we really wanted to show the legislature we're being responsive to the audit that they had on reporting requirements. And this was really a hot button issue for a lot of the LEAs. They did not feel that, I believe that Superintendent Ben Dalton pointed out this was a 7-page document 5 years ago, now a 24-page document today. And they don't really feel as superintendents there's a value add to this particular document when it comes to the compliance of requirements. They typically divide it out and say, who's the staff member in charge of this? Check it, give me the link, and they fill it out. So there is a much bigger question that we need to have about what is the purpose? Do we need this? Do we need to shave this back and let it be just for the federal assurances so that we check that box with the feds and look at a different method for all of our other legal requirements that might be more effective? That's definitely going to be a bigger conversation, though. So the reason why staff didn't push this down the road is we wanted to really be responsive to some of those comments made regarding the audit.
Okay. Jeff, I appreciate that. And I see that AAG Buse has her hand up, and I think it might be good for her to kind of, let's hear from you right now, Michelle. I think the timing's right for you.
Thank you, sir. I did actually look through these, and part of the decision was, which of these do you as a board have a legal responsibility to the LEAs to make sure that they're doing it. And so those are the ones that I looked at to see if you did not have a responsibility to follow up, notify them, and check with them, and there wasn't a legal statutory responsibility for you to do it, then I said it's okay to take that away, because when you take on that responsibility, then you do become liable. There are some things that the statutes just put on the LEAs to do, like the In God We Trust. There was no responsibility put on you as a board to make sure that every LEA did it. The statute just says every single school needs to make sure that they do this. And every LEA is responsible to make sure every school in their LEA has this in every classroom. There was nothing in the law that said, and you as a Board of Education are going to be liable if you don't make sure that that happens. So you need to go and make sure. But once you put yourself in that position of adding that to your assurances, you are taking on that responsibility. So I think what Jeff is doing in taking those off, where you don't have a legal responsibility to do it, and instead we're saying to the LEAs, you don't want us to be the one that checks up on you, so you have some obligation to make sure that you go to your USBA meetings, that you go to your Superintendent's Association meetings, that you go to your charter school director trainings, and you make sure that you're doing all those things you're trained about, because we are only going to check up on you on those things that we are mandated to by law, because you don't want an assurance document that checks off everything anymore. So that was kind of when I reviewed it, that's what I looked for, because Jeff did have me review it. So just so you know, the legal part was done.
Thank you, Michelle. You know, as we look at this, there you can look and see how this started and how it really has snowballed, and it's really lost a clear purpose. And that's what we need to get back to, is what is, you know, what are we doing, and are we taking on additional legal responsibilities, or are we, you know, is this part of our overall control of the, you know, supervision and control of the educational systems in Utah? I think that's a big discussion that needs to be had. For, you know, right now, you understand the lay of the land and what we're doing on the document, or what's being proposed to do. I think Janet has a question. We haven't heard from her. So Janet, you'd like to go ahead?
Thank you. The more I hear, the more confounded I become about what to do with the assurances document. Number one, can I just say that I had a really hard time reading this document, and I didn't see anywhere until Jeff explained it that the ones in green were the ones they were thinking of removing. And it was so small, and when I would try to enlarge it on my computer, I'd get it just big enough to read, and then it'd black out and go back to a little tiny. So this has been hard for me as a board member to try to analyze and look through. I know Jenny mentioned one or a couple of things that she was concerned about. One I was concerned about are the school community councils and their counterparts in charter schools, because I think that's really important, because those are supposed to be run and they include parent representatives. It was one of the things on our internal controls audit that they chose to look at. And I believe that the Trustlands personnel that we have actually try to follow up on these and make sure that they're doing it right. But even at that, there was a lot of non-compliance. I did ask Debbie Davis, because they just completed their own internal controls audit, looking at their department, and they were actually doing pretty well on it. And I said, what can we learn from your experiences that might help us with this assurances document? And she told me that having the people closest to monitoring those things, fill out the assurances document was one way to make sure that things are accounted for accurately, and those with the knowledge are the ones that are filling out the information for us. I'm a little concerned about having this document filled out by July 1st because I think an awful lot of the personnel is gone by then. So that alleviates the possibility of us having those closest to those particular items, filling them out. So I might like to I'd like to recommend that perhaps we change the dates a little bit, and that we also look at having those closest to these items be the ones responsible for filling them out. Those are my suggestions. And I'm glad we're tackling this. I'm glad we found that staff has come up with a way to make it smaller. You know, it's just, it's kind of, don't take away our oversight of this and this and this, the things that are particular to us. But, you know, I can live with it. I'm just real concerned that we want school community councils with parents represented on them. So
we have a couple of options going forward. I think we could start into some motions to add or subtract from what's been presented by staff for a revised document to go out this year. We could not make any changes and basically submit the same document to the LEAs that was out last year. We could try to revise the rule and put some new timing in place, but I think that would be dangerous at this late date to try to revise the rule quickly because it would leave us without a valid assurance document for a period of time. If we pushed it out, we can't pull it in we can't bring it in any closer. So pushing it out, I think, would leave us without a valid assurance document. Those are some of the things we can think about. There has been a lot of, I don't want to say noise, a lot of discussion from our superintendents saying that this is a very time-consuming document. That's bled over into the legislature, and as Jeff told us, you know, we've heard about it from them. So I believe what staff is proposing is to try to be responsive to the legislature and also to not have us assume any more risk and not take on any more risk. So they've gone through and said, you know, these are the things that aren't required. We don't have to do this, so let's get those out. Let's keep the things where we think there probably is a legal requirement or we're not sure, and still be responsive to the legislature and the superintendents. So we have a couple of options. I'm not sure which way the committee wants to proceed. Be happy to entertain a motion, but we could stay status quo. We could go try to revise the list that's here. We can accept staff's recommendation, or we can try something else. Anyway, I've got hands up. Brent, we haven't heard from you yet, so let's do that. And then I've got Jenny and Laura's hands up.
So my gut feeling is, as I look at this list, to go with staff's recommendation. From looking at it, they understand this. If people aren't comfortable with that, then my suggestion is that we table it.
Let me just respond quickly that tabling it is not, we can't fully table it because we have to put out an assurance document under the rule this year. And the rule needs to be updated to an assurance document that has 2021-2022 school year on it. So that much has to be done before the timeline that's established by the rule. Is that correct, staff? We have to have a document out under the rule. So yes. we could just update the current document to this year and this year's date and move forward that way. That would be the minimal action that's required by the group to keep things moving. Laura, you've got your hand up, and Jenny, so we'll go. I don't know who's had theirs up the longest. We'll go Laura and then Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. I'd actually like to make a motion, and then Jenny can feed in on top of that. I would like to, I'm not sure what the motion was on this one. Can you pull up the motion, Jeff? Or who's driving? Patty's driving. There it is. I'd like to make a motion that we approve our 277-108 draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading. And then I have a caveat to add to that after the, and that's with the changes, correct?
So I think we need to be clear that when we adopt draft 1, we're also adopting the changed assurances document, because that's referenced in draft 1. Is that correct, staff?
That is correct.
Okay.
And then can I speak to that, Chair?
Yeah, so we have a motion. The motion is that the committee approve R277-108 draft 1 on first reading and forward it to the board for approval on second and final reading. And as a point of clarification, this means that we would be adopting the assurances document that is labeled for the 2021-2022 school year.
Yes, may I speak, Chair?
Please.
Okay, I would also like to add, not to the motion, but as a caveat in here, that this is for this year. I think anything we can remove from our districts this year is a blessing to them, and that we continue to bring this back and work on it and not wait at any, I will have to ask leadership if it's okay if we continually, maybe we should continue to bring this back. But Chair, that would be up to you and you as well, okay?
Thank you. And we do have an in with board leadership on this committee, so that would probably be possible, I think, to keep this coming back. But let's hear Jenny's comment, and then we'll go.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. So the things that are being removed, so I'm trying to understand the full scope of this, are actually yes and no items for the most part, right? They're not required as far as us checking up through law, but they also aren't. I guess what I'm asking is, are the things we're removing the time-consuming things that our district is so worried about, right? Or are the others required by law? And even though we're removing 12 things that could be filled out in 1 minute, because we do this, we do this, just the assurance, yes, whoever signs off on it. I'm just trying to be thoughtful of this, because if the intent is actually to simplify, are we doing the simplification, or does that make sense? Or the 20 things we're removing, they would have only taken a couple minutes. Yeah, I'm asking, I'm not saying that is the case. The other thing is that once again, that we're reminded of, and this is just me, if I have a checklist of things to remind me, not that we have to have an assurance with it, but maybe we have 2 lists. I don't, does that make any sense? Because just because we're removing these things does not remove the obligation, but it's the assurance that is bothersome for schools, but they still have to do the items. Am I right? But it's the assurance that's bothersome. Can someone help me clarify that?
I see Darren has his hand up, and I just wanted to give some of my perspective on that, I guess. This assurance document, the whole thing could be completed in just a few minutes if people just go through and check. For the most part, there are some links and other things that are required, but to really put the thought into it and contact each of the schools in the LEA and say, are you doing this? Do you have this posted? That takes a lot of time. Even if it seems like a simple item, to really assure it would be a big effort, even because there are a lot of schools in these LEAs and the superintendent's filling it out for everyone. The other thing is, I thought the same as you did, Jenny, that we might, as this evolves, when we talk about the purpose, we may end up with a document that is a list of requirements for the schools so that they can go through and use that as their checklist. And we add to that every year, and then have an assurances document that is separate from that. And one more comment from me. We learned in our audit committee that the current assurance document that we have is not effective. Whatever is happening on the assurance end with the schools doesn't seem to be translating into compliance on the audit. So we're not, by not requiring an assurance on all these things, I don't think that we're taking any more risk that the schools are going to be non-compliant. We have a bigger issue than that we've got to address long-term. So anyway, Darren, please go ahead.
Chair Hansen, your comments covered the thoughts that I was going to add. Did a great job. I have no other comments.
Wow, if I'm on the same track with Deputy Superintendent Nielsen, I'm doing all right today. So good.
I guess I'm just thinking they're looking at this document, the legislature is, and our leadership is, or our LEAs in whatever capacity, whether the superintendent or whoever fills it out. And this is what's weighty for them, not the overall requirements that we're requiring from the state, because we're still requiring all those. It's just the document to submit, right? Am I understanding that right? That's what becomes time consuming and is to get that turned in.
And no requirements change as a part of this. The LEAs
Okay.
Law, they just have a shorter document. We can show
that
we're cooperating by trying to minimize this part of their administrative work, but still, I think we do have to have that bigger discussion and move forward. So
okay, that's fine. That just provides some clarity to me.
And we do have a motion on the table. I'm aware of that. Did you drop your hand, Laura? Okay, any other comment on the motion? If not, I'm going to restate that one more time, and then we'll vote. The motion is that the committee approve R277-108 Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading, with a note that this also includes accepting the assurances document that's been updated for 2021-2022 school year and presented by staff. And I think that's the motion. We'll go ahead with that. Please vote.
And Chair Hansen, can you also, or maybe Nora Lee could include in our minutes the caveat that Laura stated about having this come back for discussion throughout the year in the committee?
Yes, I can do that.
So we just passed that one unanimously, and I was just thinking about the best way to do that. We have a committee now that's requesting that it come back, and I think if we put that in the minutes, will that be sufficient, Vice Chair Belknap, for leadership to understand that's something we want?
Yes, that's a committee request. Yeah. Actually, you can probably tell leadership, and so now you have.
All right. Sounds good, and thank you, Nora Lee, for keeping our notes accurate and complete. Okay, we are ready then to move on. We have just 15 minutes left today, and we're ready to move to our last item, I believe. This one is item 7, Access Recommendation 2 update. And I think we'll ask Patty to give us a little bit of an intro here, and then I have some quick thoughts as well when after she's given us that, but go ahead, Patty.
Yes, this is in regards to Access Recommendation number 2, and as a review, Access Committee means let me remember exactly what it states, the advisory committee to the board. And some of the members that are here today, if you can turn on your cameras and just do a quick wave to all of them so they can see who's on. Well, I have Rosanna Benali-Sag, who's the chair. John Arthur's also in attendance, Clustina Mahone-Reynolds, Kalina Potts, and Allie Martin. If you guys could just do a quick wave to the committee so they can see all of you and the hard work that you've done in putting these recommendations forward, that's really appreciated. So with those recommendations, the one that we're looking at today is the recommendation number 2, and that states educators and administrators are provided anti-racist, bias, equity, literacy, professional learning, as well as opportunities to learn about themselves and minoritized groups to raise awareness and promote change within our educational system. I wanted to take you first of all through some of the backup documentation that is in here. There are a few terms that are within that recommendation itself, and so this is an internal document that is a draft with some of that vocabulary just to guide you through what some of those words mean and what we're talking about when they're being stated internally with USBE. There's also some information about diverse student populations in here. This was also what was included in our strategic plan when we reported out, so there's some information that's in there as well. as well as some further equity concerns when we talk about other populations. So we talk about race, student disabilities, we talk about all of the protected categories as well, so that we're providing access to educational opportunities for all. So those are some of the items that are in there as well. And then we are going on to specifically just do a presentation that Holly's going to do next, Holly Bell, and it talks about an equity lab. And that is something that we've been doing since 2019, but I know that some of you are new, and even those of you that aren't new may not have heard of this before. And so Holly Bell, could you provide that presentation?
Happy to. So Holly Bell, Equity Specialist for USBE. The equity labs were designed to empower districts and charter schools to identify, local solutions to overcome inequitable circumstances in their educational communities. We used stakeholder surveys and feedback as a guide in the planning and implementation of the equity labs. Based on that feedback that we gathered, the USBE staff identified potential areas to increase equitable learning opportunities for every Utah student. In particular, students who experience barriers in accessing learning opportunities. The equity lab process and focus is determined through peer-reviewed research and applicable board rules and laws that align with the board's mission, vision, goals, and a portrait of a graduate framework. For the equity labs, districts and charter schools sent leadership teams to participate. The Equity Lab experience is an interactive, collaborative, and iterative process where LEA teams analyze data connected to their student population, examine root causes of the disparities to access to educational opportunities that they identify, and they create action plans to address these disparities. So far, USBE staff has offered 2 separate equity labs statewide in the spring and fall of 2019. The focus of the first equity lab was increasing student access to effective educators and the potential impact effective educators have on student populations. So what Patty is showing you is a slide deck that provides you with a snapshot of this equity lab. To summarize, when we examined statewide data, we found that teacher retention in a school was the greatest determining factor of student academic achievement. And we disaggregated this data by student groups, both at the state level and local level. So you can see statewide data that was presented in the slide deck that we have provided. The focus of the second equity lab was access to early college and career coursework for underrepresented students. Early college and career coursework was defined in this context as advanced placement, international baccalaureate, concurrent enrollment, and CTE career pathways. This topic was chosen based on the requirements outlined in Board Rule R277-701, the early college programs. I've also provided you with a two-page overview of the reasoning structure, intended outcomes, and statewide data involved in this equity lab. So that is the first visual that was on the screen. Our intention is to repeat this equity lab virtually in March, where we will continue our focus on early college and career programs. We're hoping that this will allow us to begin gathering longitudinal data that will help us develop best practice models to share with all stakeholders. We have received a lot of great feedback from LEAs and appreciation expressed for them to gather together with their local community to create solutions to these equity-based problems of practice and learning from one another across the state. So I will also add that Vice Chair Davis was in attendance at one of our most recent equity labs. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
So with that, before any questions, we have the equity labs and then the demographics and whatnot. And I think if there are any questions, we can answer them now. I know that we have 11 minutes left, so I'm going to go back to Chair and have you guide the conversation of what you'd like to see next.
Yeah, thank you. And I just have a couple of comments, and then we'll see where we go from here with the time that we have. I think that we're starting a journey here, and the Access Committee has helped us to get that started. I think a lot of these issues have been on all of our minds as board members for quite some time. And we have, and I'm looking for my paper here, we had a vote yesterday on a resolution, and that passed unanimously with the board, and that also helps to direct our efforts as a board. Part of that resolution said that that we recognize that there are disparities in educational programs and outcomes for underserved groups, including students of color, and that those exist in our current education system. We have some data that's been presented today that shows, and if you can flash back to that Student Rise and Utah Aspire Plus outcome demographics data. I don't know the page number in that. I think it was in the PowerPoint presentation. It's a landscaped document with a table on it. Let's see, back a little bit right here. So we have some data that was presented that shows that some of our students of color are performing well under the Utah average, and well under the data that we have for Caucasian, Asian, and multiple race all seem to be at the higher end, where Black, American Indian, Hispanic, Pacific Islander seem to be lower than that based on the data we have here. We also have some data here on economically disadvantaged kids and non-economically disadvantaged. And you can see that that is a big factor in performance, or seems to be based on what we have here. If we look at not economically disadvantaged, those children are performing higher than any of the other demographic breakdowns that we have in most of those areas. So that seems to be, a real factor. We have bilinguals listed here, emergent bilinguals, and students with disabilities. Also on these measures, they're performing at lower levels. We haven't included on this list some other characteristics and demographics. The data is a little bit harder to get, but our LGBTQ student population is not listed on this list. What I would propose is that, especially given the time we have today, but I'd propose that we have some discussion today, but I'd like to ask staff to go back and help us to define the problems that we are actually experiencing in Utah schools with Utah students. I think if we're going to move forward with training, we need to know what are the issues we're trying to address, what are the problems we're trying to solve. That's the first step in problem solving, is use data to define the problem. I'd like to have staff collect detailed data on characteristics and demographics as related to educational opportunities and outcomes. And then that, I think, will give us what we need to start talking about where can we improve. I'd also like to understand Utah demographics are a little bit different. Some of these percentages are very small. I'd like to put some real numbers to those as well. And that doesn't mean that small numbers, those individual kids are all very important. But as we're allocating resources and efforts and prioritizing what we do first, I think it's important for us to understand the numbers so that we can see how many kids we might be helping by taking certain actions that we might decide to do. From that point, I think that we can define our goals. We can look at best practices. I know there are pockets of success in Utah. Some schools are doing things very well. There may be other areas where we're really struggling. But I think that we can draw from those best practices and see what we need to do to influence the outcomes that we're having, the access that our students have to various programs, and the opportunities that are given to them. So those are my preliminary comments. I'll look for board member comments or committee member comments from here. Jenny, you've got your hand up. We'll let you go.
Yeah, just a couple things. There's some wording items on here that I have questions about. So under which document is this? sorry. I don't know which one I was under. Yeah, the education equity current conditions. This doesn't match our board directives, and I'm wondering if those wordings can be changed. The Utah State Board of Education strives to create a system that provides equitable outcomes. In our strategic plan, we do not use that terminology. We actually use equitable conditions and equitable access. That's what we use. So I'm wondering if we can make sure that's maybe cleaned up. I don't know where this came from, but so that it actually resembles that. And then once again, kind of like Scott was indicating, actually indicate those groups, and then what accesses we're already providing for them are conditions for certain groups. And even the first one here, and this is what I appreciated our dialogue earlier about our English language learners, and that's part of the reason why I asked such pointed questions. Is this policy meeting the needs of families, right? Is the curriculum there? And where it isn't, what's happening is our educators are actually reaching out and saying, you know what, we could, this writer of this particular textbook could improve here. What were the other questions I asked her? Just some very pointed questions, because that's how we make improvements, right? Is we look at these policies, and that's what we do throughout all of our board meetings. And we say, is there any problems with all these? And then we make those changes. And then we come back 2 years later and we do it again. And we're making this continual progress. And anyways, I was completely impressed by the direction we're headed. Not that we're perfect. There's a difference between perfect and progress, right? And good progress. And then the thing that I've been concerned about, and I've had numerous meetings, is the terminology we're using that aligns with critical theories. I feel like we've got to clean that up. We're disenfranchising our families by not listening to all of our families, by only focusing on certain elements. So those wordings are those ideologies that align with critical theories we really need to take a hard look at. And the other request I'm making is that next month that the resources that are being put out to districts, that those come to our committee meetings so we can look at those. That's my comments for right now.
Thank you, Board Member Earl. I see that, Nora Lee, are we okay to run a few minutes over, or are we going to get cut off?
No, we're good to go for a little bit.
Okay, let's hear from Superintendent Dixon, and then from committee member, Board Member Straight.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. I think I just need some clarification on your earlier recommendations. So when you're directing staff to go back and provide this committee with additional information, I just a little bit confused, because for me, as I look at the data, we presented some yesterday on in relationship to learning loss, and that's also broken down by demographics. To me, the outcome we're trying to get to is closing achievement gaps. I think we've been pretty clear about that. So we can definitely put numbers, raw numbers, to the percentages. I'm just a little unclear about the question about what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve. As staff, we look at those numbers and the data points to try and close achievement gaps, as you so aptly pointed out at the beginning. So can you clarify a little bit what you mean by asking about what we want to attain? No, I'm asking Board Member Hansen, Chair Hansen.
Yeah, in particular, when I look at this this graph, the Student Rise in Utah Aspire plus Outcomes Demographics, that was the one that I focused on. I see economically disadvantaged and non-economically disadvantaged, but I don't know how many of our, for example, Black students would fall into the economically disadvantaged category. If we're going to put some training and helps in place for this, some of these are conflated because we don't understand how these different groups are mixed, I guess, or if you see what I mean there. We also haven't included, in some of our discussions, we're including just race and ethnicity categories, but then we also look at these other factors, economics, bilinguals, students with disabilities. I think if we're going to tackle this, we should put all of these characteristics out and see, because we've got kids that fit into several of these categories, and one thing may be more controlling than another. We're trying to discover what are the issues that are creating these disparate barriers to entry and disparate outcomes. I think that it's important for us to understand, what are the levers, what are the best levers for us to pull first as we work towards getting better and better in what we're doing. I'm certainly saying I can look at these numbers and see that there are disparities. That's clear, but I don't understand how those different categories that we have drawn, how those all interact right now. So I just like to take all the data that we have in all those areas, and let's try to figure out what the biggest influencing factors are, and then try to deal with those in our training and as we go forward. My comment.
That's really helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, and we are at the end of our allotted time. Are there any other committee members that have anything that they would like to add? Is there anyone who would be opposed to us directing staff? I don't believe we need a motion to do that, but directing staff to come back with more information so that we can, with the goal of defining the problems that we are seeing or the issues that we have in the Utah educational system in as detailed a fashion as possible, so that we can go and try to solve those problems. Can the committee get behind that? I'm seeing nods. I hope we're okay. All right. Yeah, Brent, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I really like to get to the heart of things a little bit with the mentioning of critical theories by Board Member Earl. Because I look at the definitions as provided, and one of the comments that keeps coming across to me from others is that there's these critical theories that are that make this sound like a Marxist promoting agenda, and I would like to know exactly, because I don't see it. I don't see those critical theories being in the definition. There was a mention of the term, using the term outcomes. Well, that's where we're headed. That's where we want to accomplish. That somehow this is a word that is some type of key word to these critical theories. I don't see it. So when we discuss this again, I'd like to know, Board Member Earl, what you're seeing here. Very specifically, what is it you're seeing?
I'd be happy to do that. I can provide some kind of a presentation to show you the connection of language and particular philosophies, if that would be appropriate.
Yeah, and I think I would very much appreciate some offline conversation. You could do that. I think that we need to go back to the resolution we passed in our Portrait of a Graduate. We stated in our resolution that we are assisting in developing each student's unique potential. I don't think that means that every student goes to Harvard. I think that we are here to assist each student based on their skills, abilities, proclivities, whatever you want to say, their unique characteristics to get as far along to become the student that we envision in the Portrait of a Graduate as we can. That's going to involve many different methodologies. Good teachers can go a long ways in doing that. Our policies and procedures can promote that. But I believe that that's the goal that we've all agreed to. And I know there's a lot of political rhetoric that's going on all sides of this. But I'd like to, as much as possible, focus on our students, focus on what indicators we have of access to opportunity, and also to how we can help them along to improving themselves, to learning. I mean, that's what education's all about. So hopefully we can do that. I think we've got a good group to do that. We've got a lot of good heads and a lot of good opinions. We come from good backgrounds to do that. So I'm hopeful we can get to a good place. and keep our students just in the forefront. We think about all of our students and how we can help them. But I think I don't see anything else, and I believe we are over time. We're going to go ahead and close the meeting. I appreciate everyone, the input that's been given today, and the things we have been able to accomplish. This one will come back on the agenda for next month, and we'll see if we can move this forward. But thank you, everyone. Have a good Thursday afternoon. I want to say Friday, but we're early this month.
Yeah.
See you
It
all.
feels like Friday.
Yep,
Thanks,
thanks
Scott.
very much. Yep, USBA conference going on, so tune in. See you guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.